Folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you don't mind taking your seats, please. And I'll go ahead and call this Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Whitefish City Council to order. Happy President's Day to everyone, and we're going to start with our Pledge of Allegiance. We do have Troop 1936 in the house this evening. Thanks, you guys, for coming tonight. Very much appreciate you attending. And I'm going to invite you and John, your troop leader, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance tonight. Thanks very much, guys. It's great to see you here. I've neglected to invite former Councilor Melissa Hartman back to a meeting to receive her ceremonial plaque for her 2 years of service on Whitefish City Council. Melissa served from 2018 through 2020 nobly, and she contributed very much to this city, and I wanted to thank her tonight, a year and a half later, for her service. Although we acknowledged it back then as well, we just didn't have the plaque made. So, Melissa, would you please join us up here? And I'd just like to present you with your service plaque on behalf of the city. We're going to move on to presentations. We have the Whitefish Housing Authority update on the Snow Lot project and other potential projects. Do we have someone here from the library to present this evening? Housing Authority, excuse me, Addie. I need reading glasses.
Addie Brown, 331 Carroll Avenue in Whitefish, and I also serve on the board of the Whitefish Housing Authority. So there's a lot of things happening, and so we just want to bring you up to date on a few things. Mention some things that have already happened and how we're going to be moving forward. So on the Alpenglow Apartments in 2021, we worked with Homeward, and we're able to develop a low-income housing tax fund to get a grant and build a 36-unit low-income housing apartment complex on Edgewood. Of the 36 units, the majority are working households, with 7 having a head of household over the age of 62, and 7 households with school-age children. The current wait list for this project is over 100. It's something to think about when we look at housing, and that there are people who work in Whitefish that still meet the criteria for low-income housing. Another project we're working on right now is the Snow Lot. In June of 2020, the Whitefish Housing Authority was given the property that's currently known as the Snow Lot, and we are trying to find a new name for it. So if anybody has any ideas, we'd love your input on coming up with a new name for the Snow Lot. We've entered into a contract with an owner's rep / construction manager. His name is David Science, and he's from Montana Construction Company. And we've also contracted with our architect and engineer, which is Jen Clary of Encompass Designs. And they are both on the WebEx right now if you end up having any questions for them. To date, we've secured full funding for this project, we hope. We're pretty confident of that. And the full funding has come through TIF funds. The city donated the land to us, which is huge. That's going to make a big difference for this project. ARPA funds and payment in lieu funds that all came from the city. So we are at a budget right now of $8.7 million on this project. We're looking at home sale prices will be set for these households making between $80,000 to and 20% of AMI. And at the current construction estimates, we anticipate home prices will stay below $300,000. We have had our first site review meeting with city staff, which was incredibly helpful to us and getting us moving forward on this project. And we have a second meeting scheduled for March 17th. We currently anticipate building 22 two-bed, two-bath townhomes, with 20 being two-story and 2 being single-story units. To date, we have completed our site work with Flathead Electric to determine where the power will come onto the site, and are looking to order the transformer to potentially have power installed on the property summer of 2022. The subdivision and PUD applications will be submitted in May of this year. Planning Board, City Council first and second readings, and the 30-day waiting period will conclude in October of this year. That's the goal that we have in mind right now. After that process, our construction bid packages will then be sent out with a hopeful infrastructure build to begin in March of 2023, depending on weather and water levels. We've got a lot of snow sitting out there right now. The final plat application and architecture review will then commence with building permits in June of 2023. And we are assuming and hoping for a 16-month construction build. We are also moving forward with Housing Whitefish. Housing Whitefish is a 501c3 nonprofit arm of the Whitefish Housing Authority. We originally had, since 2003, have had a 501c3 in good standing with WALT, and that has been operating, currently is doing business as Housing Whitefish, which is how we're able to accept donations. We're working with our attorney, Jason Harvey, to completely revamp our nonprofit with a full and complete name change to Housing Whitefish and a standalone board of no less than 7 with its own executive director. We contracted with FECC to create our branding guide, complete with logo, mission statement, vision statement, and core values. That process is already complete. We have currently sat 3 members of the Whitefish Housing Authority to the board of the newly formed Housing Whitefish Board. We've received 10 letters of interest from members of the public and will begin interviews this month, actually probably early March, to seat the remaining 4 individuals. From then, that will be a perpetuating board going forward. We've received a grant of $75,000 from Explore Whitefish to hire a grant writer to help Housing Whitefish find and secure long-term funding for affordable housing projects in Whitefish and staff, because we are going to have to staff up. Land banking. The Whitefish Housing Authority owns a piece of land adjacent to the Alpenglow Apartments, and we're going to be using that to create additional rental housing. We've determined that it could create up to 19 additional units of affordable housing for our community, and it all depends on funding. So we're looking toward donations and having the new Housing Whitefish person work with the grant writer to bring in funds so that we can move forward with the Alpenglow project. It would be great if we could be working on 2 projects at the same time and then go further from there. The Whitefish Housing Authority's board members have reached out to other landowners in our community to potentially partner with or purchase suitable land, and we will continue to work trying to find additional land. And we are currently in talks with the city to potentially develop city-owned land on Monaghan Road with potentially 100 units of affordable housing. And as it stands, that's where we are on our projects at this point.
Thanks, Addie. That was a helpful update. Any questions for Addie? Frank?
Addie, are those units by Alpenglow going to be, or planned to be, ownership units or rental units?
Rentals.
Rentals. Okay, thanks.
Rebecca?
Yep, Addie, how do people donate to Housing Whitefish, and what is the balance that we have in the, that's my first, I have 2 questions.
Okay.
What is the balance that we currently have, and if people wanted to donate to the 501c3, how would they do that?
They can do that through the Whitefish Community Foundation. They can do that directly to us at the Whitefish Housing Authority, and we'll be setting up phones and, all of those things and everything. Actually, at our board meeting this week is when we will be finalizing our bylaws and everything so that we can move forward with everything that's going to be done. As far as donations, other than the funds that we have received for the snow lot, it's a little bit less than $18,000 that we've received in donations. So that's the part of the Housing Whitefish position is going to be grants and working with the community to hopefully encourage people to support the housing that we want to build and is so desperately needed in our community.
Okay, and my second question, I thought that the $75,000 was only for grant writing, but
It
you're
is.
going to be using it for staffing too, or?
Well, it depends. There are grants out there for staff, but it is definitely, it's designated for grants, and that's what it's going to be for. But there's often grants out there that will help you with staffing.
Okay, I might want to check with CBB and ask if that was their intention.
Oh, we've been working with them
Oh,
on
okay,
this completely, yes.
okay, thank you.
Further questions? Not seeing any. Thanks, Addie.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate the update.
You're welcome.
We'll move on to item 4, communications from the public. We do have 3 public hearings advertised for this evening, so if you're here for those specific hearings, please wait until I call those hearings. Otherwise, if you have anything to bring to the attention of the council, now would be your opportunity, and name and address. Rhonda, please, when you approach the mic.
Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Ave. On your agenda later, further down, you have the Viaduct Overpass improvements, and that's not a public hearing, I don't think. I just had a comment. So this has been in the Downtown Master Plan as a catalyst project since 2005, adopted by the council in January of 2006, and it was included again in the update, which was first adopted in 2015. So this is a really super important project because it not only connects the bike and pedestrian system, but it also integrates the north side of the railroad tracks with the downtown. So it's very, very important. And as it stands now, it's super underutilized width and kind of hostile for cycling or walking. And I'm really glad that it's being undertaken and appreciate that it is in spite of the inability to land a grant. And so that is all great. But I really hope that you can find a little extra somewhere in the budget to enhance it so that it improves its feeling for when you're walking or riding over it. In the master plan, it has some planters that separate the pedestrian and bike from the traffic, which had trees in them. I understand the problem with that, but they do make cement barriers that have a cavity for planting greenery or whatever, and we could use evergreen native stuff, and that would really improve it. And I've seen many pictures online of these in cities. And also the fencing, which resembles a prison camp perhaps, or a penitentiary. Kalispell has just put in a very nice overpass fencing over where Idaho becomes US 2 over the railroad tracks as part of their Rails to Trails bike thing. And it looks great, it's black, it's very attractive, and I hope that we could replicate that perhaps. And since we invested TIF in all the Catalyst projects, it has really driven the increase in tax revenue to the city astronomically. Plus, you get all the money that used to go to TIF. So I'm hoping that out of all of those new funds that you're receiving, you could find a little extra to make this project a huge success. And I'm sure that all the businesses on the north of the viaduct and everyone who lives on the north would really appreciate it, and so would everyone who walks and bikes. So hopefully squeeze a little more blood out of the turnip there. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Nathan.
Nathan Dugan, 937 Kalispell Avenue. Been feeling a little dizzy all afternoon for some reason, so hopefully I can read okay. So I'll jump right into it. So we have an economy here that's primarily low wage for many wage earners, and therefore it's reliant on renters for its continued success. As the cost of homes continues to go up, this becomes more true every day. I want to focus primarily speaking on rentals, housing tonight, as these have been in short supply for a long time, though we're also seriously deficient in affordable ownership units as well, and making some slow progress on all of that stuff. Lately, we've seen the small amount of rental housing that we do have slowly decreasing in numbers. Just looked at the complex behind the VFW and the proposal to demolish 6 units in a pretty good downtown location. I know they're not the nicest, but to build very expensive condos or duplexes, whatever you want to call them. They came before the planning board last week as examples of this phenomenon. We've also seen tax credit projects recently convert to market rate, further reducing the number of affordable rental units in Whitefish, and we're not really doing, in my opinion, a great job at building more. And really, we only need to look at ourselves to figure out the reason why. Wendy, got to thank you for the updated numbers. When I came in here today, my numbers were a little bit more generous than the numbers that you provided at the work session earlier. So the 2016 housing needs assessment indicated a need for 360 affordable rental units. Since that time, we've only built 70 total deed-restricted units, 49 rentals. Though the state of Montana outlawing inclusionary zoning did not help our cause, this council and past councils have done their fair share of harm in that regard as well. All of you have voted against proposals that would have increased our affordable housing stock, and at least one of those votes for some of you was under the mandatory inclusionary zoning program that the state outlawed. The city has denied 89 affordable rental units, what would have been at least 48 affordable ownership units, and at least 480 total rental units since 2013. I'm confident that some of the people who have been booted out of their rentals over the past 2 years would have appreciated that rental housing stock even if it was market rate. Do the proposals that come forward generally have too many market rate units? I would contend that maybe they do, but it's impossible to build affordable units at the pace that we need without the scale of the market rate offerings with which they coexist. The alternative that we've instead decided to go for is building nearly 0% affordable in a fruitless effort to stop the development, I guess. Just 5.9% of the 1,185 units built since 2016 have been affordable, 5.9%. That's notably worse than even the voluntary legacy homes program, and is a direct result of city councils denying these projects so frequently. There's an item on tonight's agenda that proves how challenging it is to build 100% affordable projects, even with the best intentions. Tomorrow's Flathead Beacon quotes Jerry Dunker as saying, "I think the future of projects like this is that they will be a mix of free market and deed restricted, using the profits from the free market and using those for the shortfalls of the deed restricted." Now, I personally hope that the many people who stood at this podium over the past few months and preached that we need a nonprofit-only solution or a different public-private partnership than Mountain Gateway to fix our housing crisis will help Jerry buy down the cost of his homes and keep them affordable, but that remains to be seen and is maybe some years in the future. We're currently doing a pretty good job of segregating a whole lot of our affordable housing and more dense construction to one area on the outskirts of town, conveniently located where virtually none of us have to actually see it, and in direct conflict with our most important long-range planning documents that espouse the importance of an integrated community. The growth policy, as outdated as it may be, states that care must be taken to assume that affordable housing is close to employment, parks, schools, and commercial services. It states that we will provide affordable housing so that our teachers, police officers, firefighters, sales and service people, and others whose services we depend on can continue to be a part of this community, Giuseppe, not Whitefish or not Kalispell or Columbia Falls. And lastly, shortages of housing that was affordable for low and moderate income residents began to occur in Whitefish in the early 1990s. This can has been kicked down the road for my entire life. I was born in 1990. We can't change the past, but we can do better for our future. It's time to stop kicking the can down the road, both figuratively and literally, to Kalispell and Columbia Falls, and do something about this now before it really is too late to reverse the hollowing out of our community. My opinion is the size of the buildings doesn't matter if there's no one living inside of them. Thanks.
Thanks, Nathan.
Hi, I'm Mallory Phillips. I live at 937 Kalispell Avenue. I want to make a few points in regards to housing in Whitefish. First, thank you, Steve, last council, for being the only councilor willing to speak for the working class and recognizing how past votes may have impacted our current situation. Secondly, I would really encourage the councilors and those in the public to read the following books on the history of housing, setting up of communities, and how designing towns and cities in a certain way helps strengthen the community. The 3 books are The Color of Law, Walkable City Rules, and Strong Towns, a Bottom-Up Revolution to Rebuild America. Thirdly, we need to reimagine what our neighborhoods look like. We need to examine where our belief systems about what our neighborhoods should look like come from and figure out if these belief systems protect or harm the character, i.e. the people of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment tonight?
Mr. Mayor, City Councilors, my name is Tim Salt. My wife and I live at 533 Texas Avenue since 2006. Between us, we have over 60 years of professional experience working with complex public land issues. Tonight, we're here because of the action that you took on November 1st, directing the city public works director to relook the lighting situation on Texas Avenue. I sent a letter on February 14th, which was in your packet, and I sent another letter that letter responded to the presentation that was given to us on February 10th. I sent a letter today that was in response to the presentation you're going to get tonight. I hope you've had a chance to look at both of those. They will go into a lot more detail than I'm going to be able to tonight. Over the course of the Texas Avenue Reconstruction project, we have drawn on that 60 years of experience and shared our insight with the Public Works Department, knowing that the outcome will affect us and our neighbors for the remainder of our lives. Tonight, we have the opportunity to select a lighting design option for Texas Avenue, one that will likely be permanent. Staff will recommend to you the addition of standard street lights along Texas from Edgewood to Denver. As you know, a large majority of the people responding to the questionnaire living in the neighborhood are opposed to that option. But we also realize staff would not offer any option which does not include standard city street lights, especially an option for no additional lights. Deb and I have been clear from the start. We, like most of our neighbors on Texas Avenue that we've spoken to, are opposed to any new lights on Texas Avenue to protect that rural character and mountain setting that we all love, both today and during the day and at night. However, based on the assumption that no additional light would not be offered as an option, we developed an alternative using bollard lights only, such as those used by the city at the State Park Road. As you know, our bollards only option did not appear on the city questionnaire, nor did no additional lights appear as a choice to rank. Tonight, we offer you the bollards only option as a reasonable compromise between standard city street lights and no additional lights. This option would be similar to that on State Park Road option in that the bollard lights would follow the path rather than the road. We believe that the staff and the contractor can easily work with this option and with each neighbor in designing the exact placement of each bollard light base, as they have suggested they would do with the standard street lighting. In the specific location along the path to minimize light pollution while providing the necessary number of lighted waypoints for pedestrian navigation of the new path. There is no city standard for the distance between bollard lights. There is only a recommendation from Mountain States Lighting, the vendor, of 60 feet. This 60-foot recommendation is for pool-to-pool lighting, which requires far more light than the point-to-point navigation proposed in this option. We also believe this option will enhance public safety, even though no convincing arguments regarding safety exist, while protecting the rural character and mountain setting of our neighborhood for the long term. Additionally, the bases for bollards are the same as they are for streetlights, which provides an option to react to changing conditions if the need for additional light is identified at some point in time. We took our proposal to the neighborhood and gathered 23 signatures supporting the bollards-only compromise. There were also at least 13 questionnaires in your packet that were received before the original deadline supporting bollards for a total of 36. Most every resident that we spoke with feels that widely spaced bollards would be far more compatible with the rural character and mountain setting of the Texas Avenue, offer attractive lighted waypoints for pedestrian navigation of the new pathway at night, adequately light intersections and driveways, especially with new stop signs at 3 intersections, and will not cause the strong mid-level glare that the new city street lights on Edgewood do. We ask that you please vote tonight to choose for our neighborhood this proposed bollards-only option as a reasonable and flexible solution to enhance public safety and protect the rural character, night sky, and amazing views of Big Mountain and the Whitefish Range along Texas Avenue for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
My name is Suki Furman. I reside at 937 Denver Street. Thank you, first of all, for reading the very thick packet I believe you all received about the Texas Avenue lighting project. Included in there is an email that I wrote along with a photo of what the sky currently looks like at night along Denver Street. It's stars and aurora when the aurora is out, and beautiful moonsets. This is a very rural part of our city that is still left. The people who live there chose to live there because we wanted a rural feel. Up to this point, we, meaning the neighborhood, has compromised on the Texas street, which a lot of us only wanted the sewer system put in. We didn't ask for a wide bike path, even though that's in the city plan. We did not ask for street lights. We were content with the dark skies. The survey that was sent out regarding lights and what we wanted was an invalid survey. It was invalid because it didn't contain the option that many of us wanted who live there, which is no lights at all. All the neighbors I have talked to said, we do not want any lights. That's how it is now. It's rural. We can see the stars. The problem with the survey that was sent out was people signed that they wanted bollards because there was no option on the survey for no lights. So what did they want? They signed bollards because that was the least light that would be shown in the area. It's not because they wanted it, it's because there was no other option. Whitefish is considering that they are a dark sky town. We would like, with this decision, to have no lights to further and make us a model, not just be a mediocre town that's meeting just the bare minimum standards, but to go beyond that and have parts of town that don't necessarily have street lights. So we would encourage you to discuss this and think about having no lights there at all. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Thurman.
Evening, my name is Tim Strand, 937 Denver Street in Whitefish. And again, I would prefer the option of no lights. And again, some of the reasons for that, Texas Avenue is really one of the transition zones between rural, county, and the city. What we have done on Edgewood now makes a more abrupt transition from a rural feeling to a city. You're entering the city because of the lights that are there. One of the things that we find living on Denver Street, the north end of Texas, is people do use that as a dark sky area. It's amazing how many people come by to look at the stars, look at the aurora borealis when it's out, view big mountain lights in the wintertime. Photographers come and take pictures because dark sky exists out there. In the current street lights that we have, I'm a retired optometrist. In the current street light we have, quote, are dark sky rated somehow. But when you look at other city standards, they really don't meet a dark sky standard. Our current lights that we use are kind of patterned after old English oil lamps. They're set for aesthetic purposes, and the current lights shield roughly 80%. To be a true dark sky, they need to shield more like a 60% angle coming down, much like the lights the city council put in on the highway coming into Whitefish from the north. They are very shielded, and they cast light down. Remember, we see reflected light. That's why we don't stare at the sun. It's reflected light that we use as humans to view things. And that's why shielded lights that reflected is how we view things. The street lights that we have create glare. You drive down Edgewood or anyplace else, street lights up 15 feet in the air basically create glare. And they also create shadows that make it more difficult from a perception point of view for driving. Putting bollards on this, and I would recommend putting bollards on the bicycle paths themselves. Bollards at the bicycle path would be appropriate for bicyclists, appropriate for walkers, and we have a segregated bike path. Street lights really are not necessary for the cars. That street is a 30-mile-an-hour street. All headlights nowadays do have headlights, and so really the bollards would be more appropriate for the pathways. The spacing that was recommended, again, is simply a recommendation. I have seen no state or city standards as to how far apart the spacing needs to be. So the fewer spacings, the wider the spacing, the better. Remember, people are talking about we need lights for future growth. Well, part of future growth for the city has been dark sky compliance. We lose our dark skies incrementally. What I'm asking is keep this part of Whitefish a dark sky in a rural feeling atmosphere. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Further public comment tonight? Not seeing any, I'll stay with the
John,
audience.
Can I
Excuse me.
see if somebody online?
Thank you.
Sorry. For those of you who are attending via WebEx, if you'd like to speak towards anything that is on the agenda but not under public hearing, or anything that's not on the agenda, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon at the bottom of your screen, or Control plus Shift plus R also will raise your hand, and we'll give you just a few minutes. Okay, John, thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. We're going to go ahead and stay with the audience. I think Joey's in the audience tonight, and we do have an update under volunteer boards from the Whitefish Community Foundation for their 2021 Year in Review report. Welcome, Joey.
First of all, I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to brag about the library. I'm not going to read what is in the 2021 review in the interest of time, because I know you can all read, although you don't all have library cards, and I will be taking names. I just want to expound on a couple of things in the packet. The first was that for the 10th year in a row, we did receive the Montana State Library Excellent Library Service Award, and we have received it. They started giving that out in 2012. We received it every year, so we're very proud of that. The second thing is the Summer Reading Challenge. Several years ago, I called the Whitefish Credit Union and asked them if they would be willing to sponsor our reading program, and they did. And so when I spoke with them this year, we decided rather than buy prizes for the kids for every hour they read, we would start a path from the Whitefish Library to the Senior Center. And for every hour the kids read, we would donate $1. Well, they read over 1,000 hours. The Whitefish Credit Union originally gave us $500, which we gave to the Meals on Wheels. Because we had a display, we took it over to the credit union. They had it out, and someone saw it, and they sent us another $500. So we were able to donate $1,000 to the Whitefish Community Center for their Meals on Wheels program. The other thing I just wanted to tell you a little bit about is the $500 that the city gave us, which was at Christmas to use for whatever we wanted to use it for. And we decided to purchase a Christmas tree and call it a giving tree. And we purchased mittens, gloves, scarves, and small toys for kids. And we hung it on the tree. And the kids that came in were allowed to pick something off the tree for themselves or to give as a gift at Christmas. So everything else on the packet, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, and I can answer them even if I don't know anything about the subject. So,
Any questions for Joey? Giuseppe?
Just a comment. My kids grew up through the library, and I think I still owe you a few books. So I don't have a card, but I owe you books.
okay. Okay, well, I still am writing your name down. Anyway, thank you very much.
Those examples you provided are certainly touching and very moving, so thank you so much for all you do for our town.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Further volunteer board reports from the audience. I know we have Jessica from the Health Board here this evening to give us an update.
Hello,
Hi,
I'm
Jessica.
Jessica Malberg. I live at 830 2nd Street East, if you need to know that. Thank you for appointing me to the Board of Health. It's been my first full term, and then second term was abbreviated. The reason why I'm here today is that Giuseppe asked me to come give a presentation to you guys briefly. I'm the chair of our Behavioral Health Committee, so I helped organize a tour along with the Greater Valley Health Center to look at the in-school clinics that they have established for the last year at Evergreen Elementary School and as well at Linderman School. So these clinics are amazing in that they provide health care to students on campus so they don't have to leave. They also help students sign up for Medicaid and other insurance programs that they would be qualified for that they may not sign up for. I know she was saying that Evergreen Elementary has approximately an 85% of their student population that qualifies for the free or reduced lunch program. So that means that they're really kind of, they might have trouble accessing healthcare in other environments. So that was really encouraging. And then the staff at Evergreen can access those clinics as well. Additionally, they provide mental health services. So I think even up to 4 to 5 days a week, depending on the week, which is really important. I think we all know that the Valley has been facing a mental health crisis, especially in our student population. So that was really encouraging to see. They're doing wonderful work. They have right now they're kind of in the grant process of funding, and then they're going to be hopefully fully funded with mostly insurance payments coming out in the next couple years. And then if that continues to work well in these schools, they're going to try to expand this program to other schools, which could use it, which is very encouraging. So if Whitefish gets to the point where they might be interested in such a program, Greater Valley Health Clinic would be happy to talk to them. And then we also stopped by the Heart Locker, which works to provide resources to homeless or housing insecure students and youth, which is very important because we have a lot of students in our community that are living in cars or in SROs or with other families. So this program actually provides them clothing and resources, and they had a really great story about how they've enrolled one of their students into the housing at the FVCC. So she's going to go to college and be housed there, which is really encouraging. So I don't know if you have questions for me. Giuseppe was there. He could answer them. He has a little, Heart Locker provided a little statement. I don't know if he wanted to send it to you or read it himself, but I am. Oh, okay, well. So that's me. If you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica? Rebecca? No? Thanks very much.
you.
Appreciate it. Further volunteer board reports from the audience tonight. How about the council? Seeing none, we'll move on to our consent agenda. You have the minutes from the February 2nd, 2022 regular meeting. Is there a motion?
I would move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Cornell. Further discussion? Giuseppe?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'd asked to amend the minutes on a couple of points, very minor, but for future record. Michelle, when I made the motion following Councilman Cunell, the motion included the wording accepting the finding of facts of the plan from the planning board. And in my comments, I wanted to get on the record that a strong motivation for that vote was those findings and the fact that planning board denied the project 3-1, please.
Did you make those comments during the meeting, Giuseppe?
I did them in the discussion following my motion.
So they are on the public record?
They are on the public record.
Okay. We can only add comments back into the minutes if you indeed made those comments during the public meeting.
Yeah, I can send you the clip on YouTube.
I trust you. I'm
Yeah.
just double checking.
Yeah.
Great. Anything further, Giuseppe? Further discussion on the motion as amended? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously, which brings us on to our 3 public hearings of the evening. We'll start with ordinance number 22-2, an ordinance amending the Whitefish City Code to add Article Y, Chapter 2, Title 11, to establish the WB2 zoning district, which is a business transitional district, as an implementation of the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, and this will be on a first reading, and it was moved from the February 2nd, 2022 meeting agenda. Dave.
Good evening again. So yeah, in December, the City Council adopted our Highway 93 South Corridor Plan after a couple of years of study. One of the main implementation items was looking at that area of our community that's just south of Highway 40 that this Flathead County had zoned B4, which is a secondary business district, very similar to our secondary business district B2. And there's a swath of that down in that area that is zoned commercial. And when the City Council opted to extend our extension of services plan, urban growth boundary, out to Blanchard Lake Road, it basically set the path in motion so some of those property owners south of Highway 40 could, if they chose to or wish to, request annexation from the city. And typically we have a policy when someone annexes in the property zone with the county zoning that we look at, what the equivalent Whitefish zoning is. And so when we're working through this corridor plan, I think that the committee wasn't too keen on the idea of extending our B2 secondary business district south of Highway 40 if properties wanted to annex. And so to come up with a way to encourage people to get on city services and thus be under somewhat of city control with regard to architectural review and zoning, et cetera, we had to come up with a transitional zone that had robust enough and similar enough to the existing County B4 zoning, but not quite as permissive as that zoning, nor as our B2 zoning, so that it could basically provide a transition from the business service district zoning that the county has to our commercial zoning, but not allow a lot of the uses that would have a high traffic, high usage, and knowing that there isn't great access there. There's a light at Highway 40, but no other stoplights, and having uses that would require lots of accesses in and out with lots of traffic is definitely a bit of a hazard in that area with the high speed limits and the amount of traffic that's going through there with the stoplight and everything slowing down to that. So with the implementation plan, we came up with this transitional zone called the WBT, which we're now implementing. So one of the things with the corridor plan, one of the goals was to ensure any properties annexed into the city in the future are developed in a manner consistent with the community's vision for the gateway segment of the corridor. So this transitional zone provides some framework with some additional buffering, some site plan requirements. A lot of the more egregious uses are either removed or they're moved into the conditional use category to make it so that there's a public process that the city council and the planning board can weigh in on those uses as they get proposed to make sure that they do have the infrastructure, the access, the consolidated access that would be required. So with the currently B4 county zoning, you know, there's 39 permitted uses that include things like auto repair shops, grocery stores, hotels, restaurants, things like that that have a lot of high density or high traffic uses. And so most of those uses would be moved into the conditional use category. So you can kind of, I'm showing you this map up here, but you can look at what the county zone B4 as well as business service district, and with our growth policy now calls for a business transitional zone where that county B4 is. And so this, by adopting this zone, if properties do want to annex, then they would be basically required to change their zoning to this business transitional zone. So the intent of that zone would be for transitional business development, including professional offices, medical facilities, destination light commercial, light manufacturing, light assembly, as well as residential uses and ancillary services to provide a performance-based mixed-use environment in a community gateway transitioning from traditional agricultural, residential, or existing light commercial uses on lots that primarily border Highway 93 south of Whitefish, just south of Highway 40. And due to high vehicle speeds and limited access points, the high traffic uses should be discouraged, and frontage or backage roads should be developed to consolidate highway accesses. This zoning classification is intended for areas with current county B4 zoning at or south of Highway 40 and 93, and not intended for general application throughout the Whitefish area. So it's very specific to this part of town, to that property that's zoned county B4. So the types of uses that would be permitted by right are things that wouldn't have a lot of traffic, building contractor yards, churches, daycares, light assembly, manufacturing, medical clinics, nurseries with landscape materials, professional offices, recreational facilities, and then residential units above ground floor commercial would be a permitted use, but multifamily would be a conditional use. So there might be some areas in there that have wide enough lots where they could do multifamily or some type of housing when they would have to get a conditional use permit to put that in. And then things like veterinary offices and wholesale manufacturing. So the other uses would be moved into the conditional category, things like automotive related uses, bars, lounges, microbreweries, and entertainment, a hospital, hotels and motels, marijuana facilities, mini storage, RV parks. On your desk, I put down a chart that kind of shows the types of uses and has a comparison between the existing county B4 highway overlay with our current B2 zone and then that business transitional district. And all the items in yellow are more restrictive in that business transitional district than the existing B4 zoning. So you can go down through the list and see things like you know, amusement park or zoo is currently permitted in the county zoning right now. Somebody could put one in without getting a permit through the county. Automobile, boat, and recreational vehicle parts stores are currently a permitted use. That would be a conditional use. Boat and automotive sales, again, permitted use, conditional use. And you can go down that list and look at all the different things. And all the ones in yellow would either aren't permitted or require a conditional use permit for those types of uses in that zone. So we're really trying to tighten down what could happen there. With the intent of that zoning, it talks about high traffic uses should be discouraged. So things that are bringing high traffic in there, with that language would give grounds for denial if something, unless it was designed in such a way to provide access to Highway 40 stoplight or some other type of major access road that could get in and out of there. As far as the setbacks go, currently under the county zoning, there's a 20-foot setback or 30 feet abutting 93. The side yard setback is 0. or 10 feet when it abuts Highway 93, and then there's a 0 rear setback, or 20 feet when it abuts residential property. And what we're requiring is a 50-foot landscape buffer abutting 93, or 30 feet if it doesn't abut 93, 10 feet on the side, or 20 feet of landscape buffer if it abuts residential or agricultural properties, and then a rear setback of 20 feet. And we'll be adding some additional landscaping standards when we update our landscaping ordinance here in the next couple months that would provide, what type of landscaping would be required in there. So that's sort of an overview of this transitional zoning district. One of the other aspects is site planning requirements. So they would have to submit a site plan, and if they're doing any amendments to the property or additions onto the buildings there, you'd have to provide a site plan. And then one of the requirements would be shared driveway access or frontage roads, whether public or private, are required where possible to provide a cohesive internal circulation pattern and to limit access onto arterials and collectors. And then wherever possible, site design should incorporate shared parking and landscape buffers to protect surrounding properties from adverse impacts to the greatest extent possible. And then any kind of exposed utilities or storage areas, machinery, things like that need to be set back from the primary structure or screened to minimize any loss of views or privacy. So looking at how this fits in with the growth policy, in the 2007 growth policy, there were some specific goals in there to preserve and enhance the character, quality, and small town feel and ambience of the Whitefish community through innovative, comprehensive growth management system. Preserve and protect scenic views and view sheds. Preserve important rural lands and agricultural land that surround the community. And then within our Highway 93 corridor plan, with that featured land use of highway transitional, it goes into some pretty detail of what that zoning district should entail and the types of uses that should go in there. Just some highlights. Talks about development should be sensitive, well-designed, and well-landscaped. Low-intensity uses that respect the area as the gateway to Whitefish from the south. Due to highway speeds and traffic, commercial development should be destination-centered rather than auto-oriented, and uses generating relatively high daily traffic should be discouraged. Necessary frontage roads should be developed and access is consolidated to minimize congestion and maximize traffic safety. And a wide and well-landscaped buffer along the highway and robust landscaping on commercial developments will ensure a gradual transition to the more intensive highway commercial uses further north. And then the types of commercial uses such as offices, medical facilities, light industrial, warehousing, single-family detached and attached homes are acceptable. Apartments above commercial uses are also encouraged. And then more intense commercial uses will require the additional public scrutiny of conditional use permits. So that kind of outlines the type of things this zone implements by putting this on the books. And again, it was one of the main implementation items of the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan that you guys just adopted. There were some other additional goals and objectives from that plan that talk about discouraging land uses in Segment C outside of Whitefish city limits, inconsistent with the community vision. Limit future commercial and light industrial development to properties currently zoned secondary business and business service district. And so we have some very strong goals in our plan that while the county did zone some of this commercial kind of against our wishes, we don't want to ever see that expand or go further south towards Kalispell. Goal C2 talks about strongly discouraging commercial light industrial uses with large volumes of daily vehicle trips. And then maintain and protect the rural character and agricultural uses of land zone, suburban agricultural. And then making sure that any properties annexed in the city are developed in a manner consistent with the community's vision for the gateway segment of the corridor. And then again, one of the goals is to create this transitional zone. And then talks some traffic goals about improving traffic safety, reducing speed, improving intersection safety, and then encouraging uses to connect parking lots. All those things are being implemented by this plan. And then under environment and open space, talks about protecting water quality by providing connections to city sewer to properties within the urban growth boundary when requested. And we do know there's high groundwater in that area, and so getting on city sewer, if they are going to develop uses in there, I think it's an important consideration. So as far as the findings goes, this is in conformance with the growth policy and our 93 South Corridor Plan as adopted by the City Council. Does consider light and air, highway setbacks, residential buffering. It's going to have a positive impact on motorized or non-motorized transportation systems, requiring access, consolidated access as where possible. And then looking at lower density or intensity development patterns, limiting the amount of traffic. And then under promotion of compatible urban growth, and should have a positive impact on urban growth because it'll promote more low-intensity uses that serve as a buffer between the low-intensity rural areas of 93 and then the higher density, more commercial areas of 93 north of Highway 40. Looking at the character of the district, it does provide a solution to annexing County B4 properties into the city. Designated highway transitional, such an addition will allow for a smooth transition into city limits. You know, we do, obviously there's been a lot of interest in some of those properties there. Some developers are looking at what they can do under the county regulations without having to annex, whether they can do it just on a well septic. That may be coming, and they may not want to annex, but at least by providing a transitional zone that has most of the things they might want to do, it may encourage them to get on city water and sewer and then allow us to have some input on how that develops. As far as the value of buildings, it really doesn't impact that. Looking at the historical uses, it does consider the historic use patterns as well as recent changes and trends, and blends existing and established uses with the planned future uses to create a buffer district between the dominantly rural and commercial areas. So staff did recommend approval of this to the Whitefish Planning Board. Planning Board reviewed this at their meeting on January 20th. At the Planning Board meeting, there was no comments from the public. The Planning Board did recommend unanimously to approve it as written. We did receive some additional comments over the last few weeks. There was quite a few comments that came in today. I think Michelle put some of those on the table for you. But I would be glad to answer any other questions for you.
Thanks, Dave. Any questions for Dave on his staff report? Steve?
I just have a question, actually. I think it's for Angie, about annexation. Because there's been some confusion about annexation, I think, or there's, at least we've seen different legal interpretations of what happens when we annex. And my understanding and my understanding of the way we've done it is that when we annex somebody, we pretty much have to give them the land use designation that's most appropriate to what the county has designated. Is that true?
That has been our practice, Steve, is not to intentionally downzone properties when they annex into city limits. Whether or not we can legally downzone them, I think is another question. I think it's possible in certain circumstances. If you go too far, it runs into the grounds of being a regulatory taking. So it has been our policy when somebody wants to annex into city limits, we would rather have them within city limits on city sewer, city water, rather than on septic. And so that we have some control development, you know, as far as what development's going to occur there.
Okay.
I've heard, you know, I've read the same stuff as you that, you know, we can downzone them. I think we can. I think as a matter of policy, we have not.
Okay. And would it be, in your, maybe you haven't had time to think about this much, but in your estimation, would it be downzoning to go from a commercial use, which it's all zoned commercial today as we speak, right, to a residential only use, as in what it used to be before the county changed the zoning out there?
I think it would be downzoning. Whether or not it would pass the scrutiny of being a regulatory taking, I would need a bunch more information.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
I think the issue with that, though, is we're going to get petitioned to annex. So if we attempt to downzone from commercial to residential, then they're just going to pull out. That's something I've been thinking about myself. No, it's a good question. Yeah, Frank.
I haven't done all extensive research on this, but I think there's a significant difference between our setting a zoning preference for areas that are not currently within the city and saying, if you want to incorporate yourself, this is the zoning that we will accept. That's a different issue in terms of whether or not we're, quote, down zoning an existing piece of property within the city. The individual in these areas, no matter what we put out there, is accepting what might be a down zone. We are simply setting the standard upon which we would accept an annexation, which I think is quite different than changing existing zoning involuntarily against somebody. Am I missing something here?
You're not. You
Okay.
know, if a property is to petition for annexation, it is your responsibility, council, to decide on its merits according to statutory language whether or not to accept that.
Correct.
You know, and if you wanted to say yes, you can come into the city, but only if you put residential out kind of in the middle of this commercial area, I think you could do that. I don't know from a planning standpoint that it would make a lot of sense, but I think you as a council can decide whether or not to accept an annexation petition on its merits.
Yeah, and we'd be looking at what's the growth policy say, what's the future land use, and is the zoning that they're requesting or the zoning that we're requesting consistent with that growth policy? And in this case, we've already changed our growth policy to say a business transitional district is appropriate here. And so that's why we have to create this zoning so that when they do that, this is the type of zoning that they would get.
Thank you.
Further questions for Dave? Ben?
Dave, when I think about transitional, in some ways I think of the size and scale of the projects as much as I think of the uses. And I'm just wondering, I know that there's a 10,000 square foot limit in here. I mean, there's some pretty big projects that fit within that. And I know, in my mind, there's a difference between a small building that sells something and, a Walmart or a strip type thing. What do you think about that from a planning standpoint, and is that a worthy goal to try to reduce the project sizes in this area?
10,000 square foot building, yeah, you could put a lot of stuff in a 10,000 square foot building, but on the other hand, if we're trying to encourage uses like, medical facilities or warehousing, industrial facilities in those areas, rather than, grocery stores which isn't, in this business transitional, that wouldn't be a permitted use. But it's currently a permitted use, in the county zoning. It's kind of a trade-off of where do you draw that line? The B2 used to be 15,000. The council reduced that to 10. So this 10,000 is consistent with what that is. I think we've added enough things into the conditional use category that we're going to capture most of the things that are bigger in that category to have to go through a conditional use permit process. But, we also want to look at the types of uses that we want there and not necessarily put an impediment for the kinds of uses that we think are appropriate as well. And some of those might include a building that's 10,000 square feet or under 10,000.
So I know that, one of the problems with conditional uses is, in my mind, it seems like a conditional use just is a use sometimes because we can't seem to turn them down. Just thinking out loud here, is there ever been a situation where you just flat out limit the size of buildings or flat out limit the size of projects in a certain area?
I don't think that we've ever limited a building size. What's that? Well, yeah, like in our B1 neighborhood commercial, we put a limit on the size of like a retail store. It can only be a certain square footage, but that's a little different situation. Where it's, retail's a permitted use, but it can only be, I think it's 6,000 square feet or something, 4,000, I forget. But, I guess, we could look at, I'm not sure what kind of use that you'd want to restrict the size of, but some of that's going to be restricted by parking, what's available, and then, obviously access is critical in this area. And with the language of that zone, I think there's enough ammunition in there and the intent to be able to deny projects that aren't consistent with that have a lot of vehicle trips. And, it's built into that zoning district where, some of the other things that maybe have gotten denied in the past or whatever that we've gotten challenged on, were previously permitted uses and we hadn't ever really turned any down. And the language in there encouraged those types of uses. So that's why we built some of that into the intent of what we're looking for in that zoning district. And, and somebody might come in and try to ask for, one of the higher intensive uses. And I think that's going to be up to the neighborhood and the time and the climate and what develops around it, what kind of access is there. And, and with the conditional use, there's the ability to put conditions on there to mitigate some of the impacts. So.
Thank you.
Further questions for staff? Rebecca?
Yep, Dave, it still seems like if we go with all of this list, it's gonna be too commercial. Like, and I know the people that live out there, it's a very quiet area to live in, and so, I'm wondering is it possible to remove from the CUP list auto sales, boat sales, RV sales, mini storage units, and add in helicopter pads?
I mean, you guys could choose to make those changes if you wished. I mean, part of the reason from, because those uses are permanent right now. So if you're trying to get somebody to come into the city and they can already do that use, I mean, obviously we've seen somebody do a boat sales thing and be able to do that on water and septic. Car sales is something that can already be done there. It doesn't take much of a septic permit when you only have one little bathroom. Someone just talked to us about putting a giant car wash on that lot, which they can do under the county without getting anything from us. So, the reasoning, we're trying to at least, if someone's gonna do it, at least maybe they can come through our process and it goes through ARC review and we get to, dictate the landscaping and the access rather than it just going in the county. So that was the intent, is to try to make it palatable enough so someone would at least consider trying to get on what city sewer, services, city water and sewer, and then put themselves through the process, hoping that whatever they want to do would at least, get a favorable nod from the city if they meet our standards. But, if there's no incentive for them to annex, then they're just going to develop in the county where there's no regulation.
Yeah, but the other part is most of the letters talk about changing the character out there and not tying into the city aesthetics. And so I think some of these bigger uses are kind of a concern to probably most people in town, that we would be encouraging that by keeping them in there, And what is light manufacturing and assembly? Like, what would you consider that?
So, I mean, our code talks about, taking different parts and making things. So if someone was gonna, make like custom furniture where they're out of wine barrels or something like that, they'd be taking barrels in there and they'd be chopping them up and making tables and furniture out of it. So anytime you're making something out of parts that coming from somewhere else, it's a light manufacturing type of a development.
And what is an entertainment facility?
There's lots of things listed in that, like bowling alleys fall under that. Hatchet throwing. Yeah.
Okay, in a publicly owned building?
That'd be like a city facility.
Okay. Have you had any outreach to the owners in the area concerning this? Like,
we went through this long process of a Highway 93 plan where people were all invited to participate in that. A lot of property owners in that area were, participated in that process. Went through the planning board, multiple public hearings, multiple work sessions with the city council and the planning board where this was discussed, openly and over.
But nothing specific to this document, though?
That was almost exactly as it was adopted in the plan. As far as listing what that zone was gonna look like.
Okay.
So, we actually had in the corridor plan kind of listed what the permitted uses would be, what the conditional use permitted would be, what the setbacks would be. And that's, been in our draft of that corridor plan for well over a year.
And we could add small houses in here?
Single family homes, yeah, it could be a potential use. Again, this is a small little section. It's not a very big area that, in the context of Highway 93 South.
I guess, yeah, the other part is that we want to incentivize certain things there too. Okay, well, thanks. I do like the buffers and setbacks and all that detail. I think that would work out really well. All right, that's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Further questions for staff before we go to our public hearing? Giuseppe.
Again, just a procedural question, Mr. Mayor and Planning Director. Say we discussed here and proposed a change like helicopter pads. By the way, you can land in alone without the pad with the chopper. Would that be a substantive change to this ordinance, hence to be sent back to the planning board?
I think this is a legislative matter, so, you know, the council has the ultimate authority over anything. I've seen many times, you know, the city council add or take away uses of different zoning districts. So, I mean, you guys have certainly the right, if you want to modify this, you know, if you want to think about it and, you know, adopt it later. I do know that there's some properties that are getting ready to submit for annexation. So from staff's perspective, we would love to have this on the books ahead of time than starting to finagle with them on what their zoning might be if they try to annex. Once we get this adopted, then there's some surety there that they're going to have to go through some processes and, you know, whatever uses they want. We've sent a message on the types of things that we would like to see. But.
Further questions? Not seeing any. We did advertise for a public hearing on ordinance number 22-2, and we'll hold that public hearing now. Any public testimony this evening on this item? Not seeing any from the audience. Michelle?
For those of you who are attending online, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak towards this issue. Mary Flowers, please unmute your mic and speak your name and address, please.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 Main Avenue in Kalispell. You have before you a number of comments that we have submitted for the record, but I want to go through and reflect on some of the discussion you've had, as well as emphasize some of those points that we raised. I do appreciate in the work session prior to this the conversation that you had on housing, and I appreciate the thoughts about looking at ways that you can talk about your vision for housing. And that is one of the points we have on this proposed zoning that you have before you. The city has a lot of commercial and capacity to add more commercial. And by adopting this zone, you are inviting commercial uses that are not appropriate and that have long been debated whether or not that they were appropriate even in the quarter. So I also appreciate the discussion that you had on annexation. I think the point is that if someone comes to you, they're coming to petition you for annexation. And just as Kalispell has the ability to say no, you have the ability to say no. You also have the ability, and I forget if it was Giuseppe or someone else who raised the concept of having a concept plan, which, having sat on that committee with the rewrite of our PUD standards, we talked, and Bob Horn brought forth examples of concept plans that would save a developer that kind of expense by being able to have a public input on a concept plan. So that might be something you want to consider for this quarter. I would certainly urge you to consider that rather than just a site plan, that everything that comes forward has to be a PUD where you have more ability to define what is being proposed. But I would say that you are not under an obligation when someone comes and requests annexation, particularly when a lot of this area needs to be on sewer and water because it's in a, has high groundwater issues. I think you really have to look at if what is being asked to be annexed is appropriate for the city. And I also think you have to really set a large vision of what it is the city needs and wants. I don't think we've really ever talked about housing in this quarter. And that's why we provided the op-ed in the paper about the Silverbrook, how that isn't a well-done subdivision with berming to protect it from the highway, both from noise and visual. And it is a concept that I think Whitefish needs to look at more in terms of housing. I also think it's high time for you to sit down with the county and look at, and not just, I appreciate that the planning staff has sat down recently with planners, but I think we need some higher levels, city council, county commissioners, maybe the three cities as well, to really talk about how we can do a better job of planning for housing and creating a vision of something other than strip commercial along our highway corridors connecting the three cities. The other point I want to make is that I think that providing everything from boarding houses to multifamily housing can fill a need. But I think ultimately what we really want to create a vision of is a vision of a community and real neighborhoods that have parks, that have amenities, that have trails, that have not just kind of a sea of high-rise apartments. And saw the op-ed in the Daily Interlake today about one of those proposals coming before Kalispell. They're starting to get more and more pushback about just walls of multifamily housing coming into neighborhoods. So we need to think about how we can encourage real neighborhoods and a mix of housing. With the specific example proposal before you tonight, I think it's certainly not ready for final adoption tonight. There are really, and I listed out a list of ill-defined or undefined uses that I think it really is beholden on the city, particularly in this area, to clearly define what those uses are. What is destination commercial? And are we going to be sucking a lot of the lifeblood out of our downtown? What are storage facilities enclosed? You know, are we going to see the use of this prime land that could be used for higher use, which I would argue is agricultural, is residential, for storage units? What are therapeutic health services? There's a lot that's ill-defined. I'm also concerned that the site plan doesn't come back for a community review and input, but that it's something that the planning director has oversight on. So I think this is not well defined as a proposal yet. I'd like to see you flesh out a little bit more some of your earlier discussion about housing and really think about what you would gain by adopting this. I realize that you adopted the growth policy amendment when you adopted the corridor plan. We've already raised the legal issues with that. And I don't want to go into that right now, but I do think that you need to go back and possibly think about revising that to emphasize housing and to more clearly define the kind of uses that you think are appropriate in this area. I would strongly urge you to table this tonight and to bring it into a broader community discussion. I think Whitefish recognizes we need to grow, but I'm not sure that at all that this is the vision that the community has of how we should grow. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Michelle.
Rhonda Fitzgerald, go ahead and unmute your mic and state your name and address, please.
Hi, Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupper Ave. I hope you can hear me. I hope I'm not echoing all through the room.
We can hear you.
Okay, good, thank you. I have commented repeatedly on this transition zone at many corridor planning meetings and I continue to be very troubled by it because it continues to be evident to me that it's just more of the same. We have 2 miles of a B2 commercial sprawl, if you will. The community has repeatedly told you they don't want more of that. And I cannot see how this proposal is anything but that. It's just planned suburban sprawl, commercial sprawl. It's sort of establishing and authorizing that it's okay to have all of those same uses, virtually all of them, that are in the B2. Perhaps they're conditional and not just out and out permitted, but they're still all the same uses. So when I read the list and I think about what that will look like, it's just more of the same. And we are, of course, as we all know, in serious need of housing, but we are not in serious need of more commercially zoned property. And I'm continuing to be puzzled and discouraged that this keeps coming forward because it doesn't seem to be addressing the needs of the community, and it seems to be ignoring what the community has said over and over and over again, which is they don't want commercial sprawl south of Highway 40. So I'm going to say it one more time, but I did like the cartoon that in the mailing that I got, which said, I think of it as sustainable overdevelopment. And I would say that's what it is, not planning. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Anyone further remotely?
I don't see anybody, John.
With that said, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and turn it back to the council for discussion or a motion. Giuseppe.
Unless anybody wants to discuss, I would have a motion. Mr.
Please.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve WZTA 22-01, the finding of fact in Exhibit B and the language in Exhibit A as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board on January 20, 2022.
Is there a second to the motion? And the motion does fail for lack of a second.
Can I ask a question at this point?
Please.
So what are our options here? If we don't pass this, then we just leave it up to the county, and whenever somebody wants to annex, we leave it up to the planning department to try to get them to do what we want them to do? Or I'm just a little confused about what happens when somebody tries to annex at this point without,
the way I
without any
look at it
guidelines.
is we went through the corridor planning process. The plan was adopted. At the same time, we extended our urban growth boundary and our annexation plan to accommodate this area of town, south of town. And then secondly, or thirdly, we went through the growth policy amendment and changed the underlying land use. So this is basically the fourth of 4 steps, in my opinion. So to your point, yes, I think you're right. We either leave it up to the planning office to work with property owners that petition to annex the city, or they develop under county standards and you see what you can get.
Thanks. But if we do adopt this, then at least the planning staff has some guidance as to what they can expect somebody to annex in under. Is that?
Yeah, there's parameters, laid out in here, what types of uses are acceptable, which ones are gonna face a lot of scrutiny, and they're gonna have to make sure they're, meeting our criteria, and not just, those standards, but our other criteria of, what we expect.
Okay. But other than that, any annexation request would come before the council as well.
Yeah, you guys would decide what, yep, and the people that are annexing, they put in their annexation request, what zoning they'd expect, and most people will probably ask for WB2, because that's the compatible, most close zoning to the B4 that's existing out there.
But we could just say, no, we're not gonna let you annex under that zone.
Yeah, and then they'll do what they can under the county regs, yeah.
Do they have I'm sorry, I don't know the process. Do they have a chance to appeal that, Angie?
Yeah, I guess they could appeal if you guys decided not to annex them by petition. Generally, what happens is you get the request for annexation before you change the zoning. We kind of have, I think, done some changes with the planning department where they at least say what kind of zoning they expect. So again, annexations by petition are not required to go to a public hearing. They generally don't. They're on your consent agenda. If you guys would like them to go to a public hearing, there's nothing prohibiting them from going to a public hearing. Generally speaking, we haven't annexed big areas. They've been small, kind of, like just single homes annexing in, so it doesn't seem like there's much of a reason to have a big hearing on a single home wanting to, be within city limits. You could always decide that on its merits, you would reject the petition, and then I guess they would decide what they wanted to do with their county zoning.
Okay, thanks, Angie. I have a heartburn either way here.
I think a safe move for the council at this point would be to not act this evening, but perhaps postpone this. We're not held to a time constraint on acting on this item because it's our own initiative. It's a city ordinance. If you'd like to digest this further, we could hold a work session before bringing it back for another public hearing. Andy?
Yeah, I'll just make a couple comments, and I know we typically don't like to do that without a motion because we can head down the rabbit hole, but I think I was tempted to second your motion, Giuseppe, and trust me. So I'm kind of like Steve. I think we're in a little bit of a tough spot here. I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that if you look at the sheet that Dave gave us, thank you for this, by the way. I tried to do it in my head today, and I really couldn't do it very well. There's 55 permitted uses currently in the WB4. Of those 55 uses, I can come up with a pretty generous 6 that would require services only. So that means there's probably another 49 uses out there. There's another Whitefish Marine that can happen. There's a lot of other things that are going to happen out there that don't require services, that don't require us to approve an annexation or them to come to us for an annexation. So I think we need to be cognizant of the fact, because there's some zoning on the ground there today, and people will have things that they can go ahead and do, and most of them are pretty unpleasant, which is kind of why we headed down this path, I think. I'm a little uncomfortable with maybe some of the specific uses, and I kind of like where Ben was going with, I think, scale and bulk and massing, and I'm wondering if those could be addressed a little bit through a little bit more stringent set of design standards probably, or possibly. That's just something kind of off the top of my head. I think we can't put our head in the sand and not realize that it's pretty much mostly commercial out there right now anyway. And while I like the analogies of the Silverbrook Estates, well, we're not going to put a Silverbrook Estates out there, sorry. That's not going to happen. We don't have 325 acres. And quite frankly, Silverbrook Estates is 7 miles from downtown Kalispell. I don't really consider that a great housing development, in my own personal opinion. So, I mean, I think we do need to do something. I think we do need to do something that has a commercial component to it, I think, because it's out there, and that's what it is. And I think the other tricky part of this, and I think this is where Dave is coming from and the planning staff, is if we don't make it attractive to somebody, they're not going to do it. I mean, we have to have a certain amount of attraction there for them to even want to come for annexation and get on services, which would then allow us to have some design standards and some say over what happens out there. I guess my biggest concern is, one, there's a few specific uses I'm really not comfortable with. I'm not going to vote for anything that has a damn mini storage in it, excuse my French. If I see one more mini storage in this valley, I'm probably going to throw up. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just a sign that Americans have too much stuff. So there's a few things that I would like to pull out of here in terms of uses, and I hate to get down to the nitty-gritty and the picky part of that. And I would like, and I think if there's a possibility for some way for us to encourage some housing out there, possibly, at least somebody to look at that and say, yeah, this is a good spot for some housing, albeit we don't have the acreage and those kind of things. So based on that, I would make a motion to table, and doing so, I would say we come back in 2 weeks and readdress it and maybe come back with some suggestions, think about it ourselves. I don't want to push it out to a work session again. I think we've been through a lot of that with 3 years of Highway 93 corridor planning, and I think in a couple weeks, we probably all might be able to think about those things and maybe come back and have another run at it, and I would make that motion to table and close the public hearing, which it already has been done.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. That would be a motion to table until, I believe, the March 7th meeting. Is that correct, Dana? And just a reminder, Andy, I think you'll be skiing in Canada that week.
No, that's
Oh,
April.
wait, I'm going to be in Canada that week.
Oh.
We go in May.
Oh, well, then
April.
we definitely should do it, so you don't have to worry about it.
So I won't be here on the 7th, just for the record. With that said, further discussion on the motion to
Just
table.
procedural
Steve,
questions, at table or postponed?
You postpone to a date
It would
certain.
be to table or postpone, it's either one. If we table, then it requires a motion to bring it back off the table. If we postpone it, we just put it back on the agenda. So I would say postpone then, it would be easier, simpler procedurally.
It's still second.
Okay, it's okay with the second. Further discussion on the motion. Rebecca?
So Dave, I think what might work is if there could be a little bit more of the vision of what we really want to see. I mean, because we have tried to do corridor planning with the county multiple times, and it's always a firm no. And even their standards for buffering and landscaping and all that stuff really is there, but they don't enforce it. And so I think what we need to do is really articulate how we want to tie that section of the highway in with the rest of Whitefish, so it becomes a Whitefish experience despite commercial on the highway. And it is a very residential area just off the highway, which we're hoping over time might create more housing opportunity. But it also needs, like, the design piece of it, like bike paths along the highway and maybe some bridging and, just, I think it needs to be articulated a little bit more clearly what we really want.
So all that stuff's in the corridor plan?
It's in the
though?
corridor
We
plan.
have goals and objectives for bike path along there, all those things. So that's all part of our growth policy, to see
Okay.
that part of it. I mean, with zoning, you can't get too prescriptive. It just has to be, apply equally to everybody. Like all the other districts, we can talk about, setbacks and landscaping. But we can, when we do our landscaping standards, we can add specific landscaping requirements for there. We can update our architectural review standards if we want separate types of architectural standards for that area that's different than the rest of the highway strip. Those are all things that can be added.
Well, it's just when everything that's really big and kind of not aesthetically appealing sometimes is on here. I mean, what you're saying is we have to just accept it?
Well, we have an architectural, if someone annexes in and they get the zoning, then it has to go through architectural review. It has to meet our other standards. If somebody does multifamily development, we have very robust multifamily standards that they have to meet. We have non-residential standards in our code that dictate how they can design their commercial buildings. And so all that stuff they would be subject to that they're not currently subject to, that we already have in our adopted regulations.
I guess I feel like if we eliminated some of these conditional uses, it would be a little bit more.
I'd like to call the question,
Okay.
Mr. Mayor. There is a motion on the floor.
Anything further, Rebecca?
No, thanks, Dave.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. And the motion does carry on a 5-1 vote with Giuseppe voting in opposition. Michelle? We'll move on to item 7B of the agenda, which is an ordinance amending the conditions of approval of the Trailview Planned Unit Development, and this will be on a first reading and again was moved from our February 7th, 2022 meeting agenda. Wendy?
All right, good evening. So this is a request to amend condition 21 of the Trailview subdivision to reduce the number of deed restricted units from 58, which is in the entire subdivision, to 48. Just as a little background, Trailview was approved in 2018 along with the PUD overlay. Again, it consisted of 58 single-family homes on a little more than 8 acres.
subject to 24 conditions. Phase 1 was final platted in 2019. Phase 2 was final platted in 2020. As part of the PUD density bonus, the regulations at the time required 10% affordable housing, serving an income of 60 to 125% area median income, that AMI, and that is condition number 20. In 2020, the council approved a clarification of amendment condition number 21 for the remainder of the deed restricted units, that 50% of the homes would not have income limitations, but would be available to local workers. That was the deed restriction light that we've learned about over the years. So all the other deed restriction limitations still remained in place, including the appreciation. The home had to be a primary resident and no rentals. So currently, the applicant has come forth with this particular request and has noted the challenges with the increased cost of construction materials, labor, material shortage, and delays, further complicating the length in building process and its impact associated with carrying costs. So they're requesting that 10 of the homes be eligible to be sold on the free market. The applicant suggested some amendments to condition number 21. If you folks approve this, 83% of the homes will continue to be deed restricted, where the standard at the time was 10%. So it still is quite a bit more than what we typically see. We did notice adjacent landowners place illegal in the pilot, put a sign on the property. We received one letter that's included in your packet. It was a homeowner that's concerned that this alternative might cause some confusion, and they offered some suggestions. And then today you received another letter not in support of the request as well. So after you carefully consider the applicant's request to amend condition 21, if you agree that there's still community benefit and you're in support of his request, we've come up with a slightly modified version of condition number 48, or condition number 21, for your consideration. And can I answer any questions for you?
Thanks, Wendy. Any questions for Wendy on the staff report? Not seeing any, Wendy, we will go to our public hearing. Is there any public testimony on this item tonight? I have opened the public hearing. Sir.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. Thanks for being here tonight. Ben Johnson, 813 Trailview Way. I'm speaking tonight as a resident of the Trailview development, and wanted to speak in support of Jerry Dunker and his dedication to the Trailview neighborhood and this larger community. Couple quick fun facts first. Did you know Jerry works as a full-time cardiovascular perfusionist? His bread and butter is not as a developer. And aside from the federally supported low-income housing projects, Trailview has offered more deed-restricted units than any other development in Whitefish, and is all privately funded. And as a resident of Trailview, I just wanted to share that Jerry has been extremely responsive to the needs of the neighborhood, despite the significant challenges related to supply chains and labor pools, and even in a weird little chance third-party domestic violence incident that spilled over into the neighborhood, he offered my partner and I a place to stay if that made us feel safer there. As he has been so responsive to the needs of this community, I believe he deserves the same level of responsiveness in return. For us to consider adapting the Trailview PUD in a way that allows him to stay on the literal and figurative groundbreaking edge of affordable housing in Whitefish. Although I do not want to see the deed restrictions removed from these 10 units, the reality of this project penciling may necessitate some creative solutions. Over the last couple months, I've heard a lot of people saying they are fully supportive of workforce and affordable housing, particularly in areas like Monaghan Road, where Trailview is, and expressing the interest in invoking public-private partnerships in meeting that need. Maybe this is an opportunity for the members of this community to step up with that support, to guarantee that those last 10 units of Trailview can remain permanently deed restricted, and to show Jerry we have his back as he looks down the road at the next housing opportunities for this community. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Further public testimony. Jerry, did you have anything to add this evening?
Jerry Dunker, 84 Armory Road. I don't really have much to add to the requests that we have in there or to what Wendy's gone over. This is just an update, came up with today. I'll let you get those down. Just kind of updating you on where we're at. It's dated March 1st because we have one more closing coming up next week, so that'll give us 22 homeowners currently in the development. And the average sale price so far is $315,000. We have 7 homes that are under contract and under construction, hopefully to be done April and July. Average sale price of those are about $329,000. So that'll get us to the halfway point of development. It's 58 homes. This is 29 homes we're at right now. 4 homes are occupied by non-qualified buyers. So that was that light deed restriction that allowed some homeowners to have income above the 150. There actually was 5. After a year, one of them relocated to Chicago, which allowed us to have a wait list person that's a 90% AMI purchase that home. So it worked as intended. Those 4 non-qualified buyers all were under contract before we had a wait list. It was early on. The 25 qualified buyers out of this 29, the AMI average is 46 to 150%, which gives us an average of 95%. Community so far. Our wait list of 14 qualified buyers is 38 to 139% AMI with an average of 104%. The other stuff on here we've kind of gone over a little bit tonight. This strictly is for single family home sales in Whitefish. In 2021, they went up 30% and they're averaging 1.3 million. Trailview, we have an increased average sale price of 7.2% since 2020. And the rest of it just shows how many homes there are for sale in Whitefish under 500,000. And there was 105 in 2020, 51 in 2021, and 0 today. Lowest priced single family home currently for sale in Whitefish as of this morning was $799,000 for a 896 square foot home. As Ben stated, I've actually had a lot of people approach me too about how they can help, and we are looking at options, donor options, or it could be some ARPA fund options for these 10 market rate, free market homes, however you want to say it. Our goal from the start was 100%. We came into this 100% deed restricted. It didn't evolve to that. That was our goal. Unfortunately, there's economics we didn't predict, and I don't think anyone did, is why we're seeing what we're seeing tonight. So we're not going to stick these on the market right away and try and sell them. I know we can, but we want to look at some options to keep these affordable and keep them deed restricted, some buy down options potentially, and that would be our goal as always, is 100% deed restricted. Questions for me?
Thanks, Jerry. Any questions for Jerry? Rebecca?
Yep, Jerry, I know you've been showing up a lot over the years and keeping us informed. If we approve this tonight, when would you think that your project would be completed? Are you still on track, or is it just really hard with staffing too?
Yeah, it's hard to predict. We keep ramping up. We feel like it. So let's see, our first home was occupied in April of 2020. So 2 years later, we're at halfway, or not quite halfway, so another 2 years minimum.
Oh, it's been hard. I mean, we've been through a recession where it was kind of the opposite. Now we're on the other side of it, just with, it's a difficult situation. Thank you.
Further questions for Jerry? Thanks, Jerry. Further public testimony this evening on this item? Not seeing any, I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to the count. Excuse me, Michelle. I didn't see anyone's hands raised on the
I didn't either,
screen.
but I didn't know if we should
Sure.
open it up to them.
Sure.
For those of you online, if you'd like to speak towards this item, please raise your hand. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Michelle. Giuseppe?
Mr. Mayor, I don't have a motion template here, but so help me if you need 2 motions. But I'd like to move to consider the applicant's request for amending condition number 21, and if we need to go with it, to amend to state the following, because 6 of the units in the neighborhood are required to serve a population with an AMI of 60 to 125%, condition number 20. And the following is in the packet.
So you're proposing 2 motions?
If we need 2 motions on the record, if it's one motion.
I think you can just have one motion approving the ordinance.
Just one motion to accept or to consider and accept the applicant's request.
And I believe that's ordinance 22-2, if I'm not mistaken, Michelle?
I'm looking.
Ordinance 22-2, there's a motion on the table for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
I saw Rebecca's hand, seconded by Councilor Norton. Frank?
Clarification, Giuseppe, I assume that proposal includes changing the findings of facts as proposed by Wendy in her staff report?
Frank, you find me unprepared. So, sorry, Boy Scouts, I should be prepared, but I'm not. So,
that was not my intent. My intent
That's
was
okay.
to help you. Was to help you, Giuseppe.
Okay, I'll take your help. Yes, sir, absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there further discussion on the motion?
Well, since I
Giuseppe,
moved
yes.
and since my first motion died, I'd like to just comment to the fact that I believe that this is how it's done. And I want to just commend and tip my hat to the people who do this. And this is how the city works together with private enterprise and donors so that we finally can offer more affordable. I don't care if they're affordable by law. I call them Ford Model T homes, housing for people who cannot afford as much as other people can. Thank you.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Further comments on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand, and those opposed, like sign, and the motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Jerry. Appreciate it. And we'll move on to item 7C of the agenda. Before we take a quick break, let's hear this item, which is ordinance 22-3, an ordinance amending Whitefish City Code, Title 7, Public Ways and Property, Chapter 3, Public Parks and Grounds, and this is on a first reading. Maria.
Good evening. This request is to adopt an ordinance amending Whitefish City Code Title 7, Chapter 3, and my staff report is on page 98 of your packet. Recently, the Parks and Recreation staff has witnessed an increase in motorized uses in parks, including golf carts being driven on park grounds, helicopters landing in sports fields, and individuals attempting to beach or moor motorized watercraft at City Beach, including a propelled float plane that drove past swimmers and non-motorized watercraft users to attempt to beach on the shores of City Beach. To address the concerns these events pose for public health and safety and the negative impacts to parkland, the Park Board directed staff to draft an ordinance revising the city code to expand the list of vehicular uses prohibited in parks. Currently, Whitefish City Code 7-3-7, motorized vehicles, states, any person who drives any automobile, truck, bus, motorcycle, or snowmobile, or any other vehicle or conveyance upon or over any of the improved public parks of the city, or upon or over any boulevard in the city, shall be guilty of a misdemeanor and shall be deemed to have committed a municipal infraction. Though the code implies all types of vehicular use is prohibited in these locations, it does not specify specific uses such as golf carts, ATVs, UTVs, aircraft, and motorized watercraft, which we have recently seen. The beaching and mooring of most motorized watercraft at City Beach pose an impact to the public's unobstructed use of the park and concerns for public health and safety. However, personal watercraft are permitted to beach in designated personal watercraft areas of City Beach because they do not pose the same concerns as larger motorized watercraft. For clarification, personalized watercraft is defined by Montana Code as the watercraft more commonly referred to as like a jet ski or a wave runner. During the January Park Board meeting, the Park Board unanimously reaffirmed the prohibition of golf carts, aircraft, motorized watercraft, ATVs, and UTVs in public parks. Additionally, the board clarified that this included the restriction of beaching and mooring of motorized watercraft at City Beach, with the exception of personal watercraft in designated locations. Montana Code identifies that the Park Board of Commissioners has the power and duty to make all rules for the use of parks by the public, and that those rules have the force of city ordinances and may be enforced in the same manner as ordinances of the city are enforced. The Park Board therefore unanimously recommends that the City Council memorialize these park rules by amending Whitefish City Code Title 7, Chapter 3, by adding golf carts, ATV, UTV, aircraft, and motorized watercraft to the Whitefish City Code 7-3 motor vehicles, and by adding no beaching or mooring of motorized watercraft excluding personal watercraft in designated locations as rule number 7 under Whitefish City Code 7-3-10 City Beach. This ordinance has no financial requirement, and I can answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Maria. Giuseppe?
Yeah, Mariah, I have a couple of questions. Number one, where does the park domain end on the water? Meaning, can I drive a speedboat outside of the park's jurisdiction and still being on Whitefish Lake?
We regulate within 200 feet of the swim area.
Thank you. Now, number two, just wondering, wouldn't it be just simpler to say any non-humanly propelled vehicle? Because what about e-bikes? What about paragliders? My concern is if we start adding items, there will be exceptions. But if we put a blanket, I agree with that, with this policy, by the way. But if we put a blanket, then we're safe. As a second comment, a seaplane, once it's on the water taxiing, it's legally a speedboat. So we really will need to differentiate seaplane from speedboats. So I suggest, and that's a question, would it make more sense to say non-humanly propelled vehicles and crafts, and then we're safe?
The concern was that it was a little bit more generic and that we were seeing these increased types of uses that we were being questioned as if it was enforceable. So the more specificity that we have, the easier it is to enforce.
Thank you.
Further questions? Steve?
Just a question about, this applies to the Whitefish Trail, not the Whitefish Trail, but the city trails as well, correct? So you can't drive your golf cart on the trail that goes out towards the lake?
That's correct.
Because that's where I see golf carts all the time. People get into the golf course. Okay.
Further questions? Andy, and then Rebecca.
Just a quick one, Maria. The only thing I thought of when I read this, are there any cases, and I can't think of too many places where it happened, possibly Armory Park, maybe out at Smith Fields or something, where someone would drive a golf cart as part of an event to move stuff or something like that, and I don't see that there would be an exception in here for that and that they would be cited, or would that be something that they would need to notify us of ahead of time, I guess, would be the thing.
Our special event policy provides an option for us to condition that as part of the approval under the park rules.
Perfect.
Yep.
Rebecca?
Maria, could you just review the laws that we have about marijuana, recreational marijuana, and drinking in the parks? Because I had a conversation with her on this, and she said she's been asked it a few times.
I don't think that has any relevance to this matter. We can bring that up at the end of the meeting if you'd like,
Okay.
Rebecca, with all due respect.
Sure. Yeah.
Further questions? We did advertise for a public hearing on item 7C of the agenda, which is ordinance 22-3. Is there any public testimony this evening? Not seeing any, I'll close the public hearing and certainly entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I would move to approve ordinance number 22, was it 23? Or just 3? 3, amending Whitefish City Code 7-3 motor vehicles and no beaching and regarding no beaching and mooring.
Is there a second to the
I
motion?
second it.
Seconded by Giuseppe. Further discussion? Steve?
My only concern is that if we restrict people from driving their golf carts from either the west neighborhoods or from the neighborhoods out by State Park Road on those trails, they'll have to drive on the road, which is far less safe for those people. And not everybody, if anybody knows anything about the golf course, you have to pretty much be willed a space in the barn there to get your cart in there. And so there's a lot of people that have carts that drive them on the trail just to get to the golf course and back. So I don't know if there's a way to exempt that one section or exempt it as a use for people with golf carts, because it's not like they're ripping down there at 40 miles an hour. They're just trying to get to the golf course or get home. And I would hate to see people trying to drive their golf carts on the road to get to the golf course rather than on the protected trail.
Maria,
Do you
would
have
you like
thoughts
to
on-
address that?
Sure. So it has always been a city ordinance to not permit motorized vehicles on bike paths as they pose a conflict with pedestrians and bicyclists.
We ran into the same issue with the lodge at Whitefish Lake shuttling patrons back to their vehicles at the overflow parking lot at the church. So we had to shut that operation down as well. So I think we need to apply that rule equitably throughout the city.
Okay, I can live with it. It's fine. Just wondered.
Chief?
So there is a provision in Montana law, if the city wanted to create an ordinance, the golf carts are exempt from driving on roadways unless the city passes ordinance to approve such. There's about 6 provisions. They have to have a horn, they have to have signals, those type of things. They have to have a licensed driver. So if the city was interested in passing an ordinance to allow that on public roads, that could happen. And it provides those safety equipment and licensed driver to do such.
Thanks, Bridger. Giuseppe?
Yeah, I like to propose a friendly amendment to add e-bikes and motorized paragliders to the list of non-permitted use.
Let me ask Maria for her comments before we get a second, please. Maria?
We have an entire e-bike ordinance already that addresses e-bikes.
Thank you. And motorized parachutes?
Motorized parachutes?
Yeah, the ones where they have the fan in their backs. I've seen them fly over Lion Mountain. And they're not listed here.
Yeah, they're a type of aircraft, technically.
They're humans with a fan
Yeah.
on their backs.
I've seen them too.
Very dangerous to
I've seen
us,
them
too. Yeah. That's it? Parachute?
It's a craft in the air. You withdraw the motion? Okay.
Yes.
Which brings us back to the original motion for approval. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thank you, Maria. We're going to go ahead and adjourn for about 5 or 6 minutes just to take a quick break. Going to call this meeting back to order. We'll resume with item 8A, which is consideration to award the engineering contract for the Viaduct Improvement Project. Craig.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. You guys have heard the staff report a few times, so I'm going to sort of breeze through this, but I think everyone's well aware of the fact that the Downtown Business District Master Plan identifies opportunities to increase the vitality of downtown, and the Connect Whitefish Bike and Pedestrian Plan calls for a continuous and connected network of well-maintained bicycle and pedestrian paths. The viaduct has long been identified as a critical link connecting the north and south sides of Whitefish. It's highlighted in both plans as being a key element to accomplish their goals. The concept for the Viaduct Improvement Project from the Downtown Business District Master Plan is included in your packet. During the planning for the Baker Avenue Underpass, we did review this concept and found some challenges with the design, namely with the larger planter boxes on the viaduct. After reviewing the initial cost estimates, we were not able to complete the project with TIF funds during the Baker Avenue Underpass, and so we applied for a Transportation Alternatives Grant. I think everyone's aware that we did not get that grant. However, we did budget in fiscal year '22 the matching local share for the project, which is $250,000. And we feel that this is enough money to narrow the vehicular lanes on the viaduct to create two 12-foot wide multi-use trails on either side of the viaduct. This will involve the replacement and relocation of the existing Jersey barriers to bring them up to current highway standards. We're also optimistic that this can be accomplished with a type of barrier that's much more attractive than what we currently see. According to the city's consultant selection policy, we did advertise for a request for proposals. At your meeting on November 15th, myself, Karin Hilding, and Rebecca Norton were nominated to serve on the selection panel for the RFP. The RFP was advertised and due on January 7th of this year. We received two proposals, one from KLJ and one from WGM Group. We interviewed both consultants on the 27th of January, and upon completion of the interviews, it was the unanimous opinion of the selection committee that a contract be awarded to WGM Group. While both consultants did demonstrate their ability to successfully complete the project, we felt that WGM really stood out with the recent design work on the Baker Avenue Underpass and all of the past projects they've worked on that are identified in the downtown master plan. The city has negotiated numerous contracts with WGM, and the budget for this year is $250,000. So based on the process that we followed, we do recommend a contract be awarded to WGM to complete the engineering design for the Viaduct Improvement Project, and the city manager be authorized to execute the contract. I appreciate your consideration and welcome any questions you may have.
Thanks, Craig. Any questions for Craig? We'll start with Giuseppe.
Yes, Craig, and I come late to the party on this one. I wonder what latitude do we have here, and if I'm out of theme, stop me, Mayor. I read the packet, and right now we're thinking about widening the two bicycle pedestrian lanes on both sides of the viaduct. And also we're constrained by budget. At the same time, I have a concern, a longer-term concern, to have only 2 lanes on the viaduct and even narrower lanes. I know that there is a bottleneck later and before, but the viaduct is the viaduct. So I was wondering, trying to figure out if there is a way to accommodate a wider bicycle and pedestrian lane just on one side, since we have a tunnel under the viaduct, and actually reserve room for 3 lanes that could be modulated later according to peak times, 2 forward, 1 backwards, and vice versa with big red lights. Would that make any sense to even consider?
I don't think it makes sense to consider under the scope of this project. Our intention here is really just to narrow the existing vehicular lanes to widen those bike ped lanes. I think doing so will still allow, there's about 60 feet of pavement on the viaduct, and so I think it should allow room for wider pedestrian lanes on either side and a future third traffic lane. But doing something like that would obviously involve MDT and a much larger scope of work. So at this point, our main goal is really just to increase the connectivity across the bridge for bikes and peds.
Thanks, Giuseppe. Steve?
Yeah, Craig, that was just my, with the Mountain Gateway project, we heard all this concern about safety north of the viaduct, and then this very next meeting, we're talking about narrowing the vehicular lanes on the viaduct. Wouldn't that exacerbate an emergency problem that we heard so much about?
I really still think there's going to be ample room to have 3 lanes of traffic with the widened bike paths. Essentially what we're doing is narrowing the shoulder. I mean, there's still going to be 2 existing 12-foot wide lanes of traffic across the viaduct. We're just essentially narrowing those shoulders from 12 feet to about 6 feet. So in the future, if there's an evacuation or if there is consideration from the state to add a 3rd lane, there would still be room.
You're sure about that?
Sure about that, yes.
Okay, because you said, I think, in the first time you said it.
There's enough room on the existing viaduct to have 3 lanes of traffic and 2 12-foot pedestrian lanes on either side.
Okay, but once we build those lanes, the pedestrian, we're kind of locked into that. Is that correct?
We'll need to use some type of an appropriate barrier that will lock us into that width, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, I would argue that narrower lanes actually provide traffic calming measures, which are similar to the bulb outs in town, and I know we discussed that during adoption of the master plan. And then secondly, by increasing the width and separating physically the shared use path from the actual roadway, I think we're actually increasing safety over the viaduct.
Right, but that is the pinch point that everyone was so concerned about at the last at that hearing, and it just seems strange that we're taking away vehicle access to get away from a potential fire that everybody was so concerned about, and but apparently there's enough pavement there to make that not an issue, I guess.
Sure.
John, just to add.
Dana, sorry.
Chief Page can also add to this. You know, again, the viaduct has been one of the identified areas, exits out of town up from north of the viaduct, but we have Edgewood. We, you know, if there is something serious, we're going to work with BNSF to get cars across the railroad tracks. I mean, they aren't going to just keep us stuck on that side. So, Joe, if you have anything else to add to that, I mean, I think that would help.
Yeah, you know, there are multiple paths that we can take in an emergency. Also, we're not evacuating all the people on that side. When you're doing that, you're evacuating smaller areas and hopefully getting them moving before we end up clogging up the major stuff. And actually, when you look at the viaduct itself, traffic flows pretty well. It's the intersections on both sides of the viaduct where our problems are.
Yeah, I understand that. Thank you. I appreciate those comments. It's just that we seem to not recognize those very comments at our last meeting, and I think that's a point that needs to be made.
I would disagree. I think the comments that were made at the last meeting extend well beyond the issues with the viaduct to include the entire Wisconsin Avenue corridor from the viaduct north to Big Mountain Road. With that said, I'd entertain a motion. Andy, Ben, I'm sorry.
Craig, is it too late in this process to consider any upgrades to this, or at least to present us options back when it's designed for upgrades that get us a little closer to the original design? Yeah.
No, not at all. I mean, this is going to be a project that will involve quite a bit of public input and many more opportunities for council to weigh in on the project. Our goal for this fiscal year with the money that we have budgeted is simply to widen the bike pedways, but I think that we would incorporate some of those other features shown in the downtown master plan with this project and at least not rule them out. The original project that we applied for under the TA grant, it included upgraded lighting with the typical City of Whitefish flower baskets to try and enhance the aesthetics. It also included the upgraded fencing along the viaduct. Those sorts of things can always be added, in the future, or the project can be pushed to a future fiscal year with additional funds, budgeted.
But the proposal in front of us is just to do the widening now, postpone all those questions to a later date.
The proposal in front of you right now is just to hire an engineer to start working on the project.
Okay, and then the scope of work is still,
The scope of work is yet to be determined. I think we've heard loud and clear from council that we don't want to rule out any of those additional improvements. And so I think what we'd likely do is come back to a work session after we've begun to work on this and talk to council about it with some cost estimates on, what some of the other improvements are and whether we want to, punt construction to a future budget year or just make sure whatever we do doesn't rule out future work.
makes sense to me. Thank you.
Andy?
I would like to make a motion, Mr. Mayor. And that motion would be that we award the contract for the engineering design for the viaduct improvement project to the WGM Group.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Further discussion?
I'll speak just super briefly to a couple of things that were brought up. I just assumed that we've got $250,000, and when we go through the engineering process and the design process, that we're gonna get as much as we can for our $250,000. And we'll echo Rhonda's sentiments. I hope we can get more than that, or maybe find some other dollars out there. With regard to having the path on both sides, it's extremely important if you actually think about it, because if you're on the east side of the viaduct and you're going out Edgewood, you don't have to cross Wisconsin. And if you're on the west side going up Wisconsin, you don't have to cross Wisconsin, because that one's on the left and the other one's on the right. And if you do it, then you're gonna force everybody to go across at the crosswalk on the other side, which we already took care of part of that problem by spending $1 million on a tunnel underneath the viaduct. So why we would go ahead and create it again on the other side by being chintzy and worrying about a third lane is beyond me. So there you go.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, Craig, but you're not done yet. We'll move on to item 8B, consideration of approval for final design for the Texas Avenue Reconstruction Project and authorization to bid. Craig?
Yes, thank you. So the Texas Avenue Reconstruction Project is the current job we're working on the resort tax priority list. Council awarded the engineering contract to RPA in September of 2020, and public outreach began shortly thereafter with a project website. Since then, we have sent 8 project newsletters, held 6 public outreach events, and had numerous meetings with residents, individual meetings with residents interested in the project. Preliminary designs for the Texas Avenue project were presented to council on November 1st of last year, and staff was authorized to proceed with final design. Attached to this report are several figures which are intended to provide an overview of the final proposed layout for Texas Avenue. Also included is a proposed schedule, the current estimated budget, a summary of written public comment received to date, along with other attachments that will be discussed during the report. I should mention there was not a summary. I did have a one-page tabulated summary. Mr. Strand pointed out in his letter earlier today that was not included. I apologize, but all of the public comment was included, just not that one-page summary. So phase 1 of the project includes construction of the Edgewood Place from Colorado to Texas. This work will be completed earlier this summer under the existing contract that we have with White Civil. Phase 2 includes construction of Edgewood from Texas Avenue to the eastern city limits, along with Texas Avenue from Edgewood Place to Denver Street. The work is intended to begin in early May and last about 150 days, so it'll be finished in October or early November of this year. To avoid construction delays experienced during phase 1, council did authorize staff to procure the materials for phase 2. Bids were opened for this material procurement last December, and the contract for that was awarded to Core and Main. So we do already have most of the storm sewer necessary, as well as the other materials to build the project up at the city shop. So that's a good thing. The city's approved transportation plan designates Texas Avenue as an urban collector. Our city engineering standards show a detail for an urban collector as 32 feet wide, which includes curb and gutter. Given the existing 22-foot width and concern for increased speeding, staff determined that a typical collector roadway would be too wide for this corridor. So we've evaluated the project, the existing vehicles on Texas Avenue, and we're recommending the reduction to a 26-foot wide roadway. We think that this will help to calm traffic and still provide sufficient room to convey traffic on the roadway. The reduced width will also help to maintain as much boulevard as possible with the existing power lines that exist on the west side of the roadway. Staff also recommended and council approved no construction on Texas Avenue north of Denver, and this was based on overwhelming desire of the residents that live north of Denver. As with Edgewood Place, staff recommended and council approved a vertical face curb on Texas Avenue. This will control drainage, provide more consistent and easier snow removal, access control, and safety improvements on the roadway. The Connect Whitefish Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan recommends a shared use path be constructed, and we've recommended, and I believe council approved during the preliminary design, that we build that path on the west side of the road. A new storm water system is proposed to be installed on Texas Avenue that will connect to the recently constructed storm sewer in Edgewood Place. This will allow the system to serve future growth in this watershed. There's an existing 18-inch water main that runs from Edgewood Place to Reservoir Road that was installed in 2007 to serve as a secondary transmission main for the water plant. And the sanitary sewer that exists was installed in 1991. Although no work is required on either of these utilities, they will need to be protected during construction, and the fire hydrants, valve boxes, and manholes will all be evaluated for replacement. Lighting. So as with past road reconstruction projects involving a bike path, we are recommending this corridor be upgraded to include the city standard 14-foot tall, dark sky compliant decorative street lighting. These lights do comply with the full cutoff requirements in the city's outdoor lighting standards, which were adopted to protect and promote public health, safety, and quality of life. This outdoor lighting standard, along with a depiction of what a full cutoff light is starts on page 184 of your packet. The code establishes standards for exterior lighting to provide safe roadways for motorists, cyclists, and pedestrians, while protecting and reclaiming the ability to view the night sky. The proposed lights will match those recently installed on Edgewood Place, State Park Road, and Summers Avenue, and are recommended in the Western Boulevard to focus lighting downward onto the path and roadway. As you're aware, staff has received considerable feedback from the neighborhood about the desire to reduce or eliminate proposed streetlights. So at the direction of council on November 1st, a questionnaire was distributed to the neighborhood to determine the desire for different types of lighting. Respondents were requested to rate the following 4 options from most to least desirable. Option 1 is a standard city street lights on a photo eye control. This is what is in the current engineering standards for city roadways. Option 2 was standard city street lights on a programmable timer. Option 3 was standard city street lights at intersections with bollards spaced in between. And option 4 was standard city street lights from Edgewood to Aspen Grove and the intersection of Denver with standard bollards between Aspen Grove and Denver. So we mailed the questionnaire to over 140 people, and we received 20 responses. That was at the time I was writing this report. I believe we received 2 additional responses today, as well as some additional correspondence. We also received a petition with 23 signatures requesting bollard lights only and some additional resident emails. So while the results varied, in general, it's fair to say that most respondents preferred bollard lights on timers. It was also brought up at the public meeting on the 10th of February that some recipients of the questionnaire were not familiar with what a bollard light was, so we did distribute an additional email last week notifying with additional information on a bollard, updating the questionnaire to allow people to revise or submit those until yesterday. So, although many local residents are not in favor of the standard city streetlights, staff remains steadfast in our recommendation to install these city standard streetlights. That's a lot of S's. I'll provide a few reasons. One, the addition of the shared use path is intended to invite and encourage active transportation, and streetlights will help promote road safety for drivers, bicyclists, and pedestrians. While bollards may be appropriate to provide waypoint lighting along trails that are not adjacent to roadways, they do not provide a safe level of lighting where pedestrians and bicyclists interact with pedestrians. While we've received feedback from the neighborhood that streetlight glare can be distracting, I can tell you that higher output waist level lighting produced by a bollard will be far more distracting. Streetlights are a proven way of reducing robberies, burglaries, property defacement, property damage, and other crimes that often happen in the dark. I've attached an email from Bridger as well as a report, a summary of incidents beginning on page 189 of your packet. This is intended to show Whitefish Police Department's support of the proposed street lighting system. Texas Avenue is deemed a collector roadway and has been designed to accommodate the increased traffic it will see. On page 196, I've attached a map from the city's growth policy. This is something that we just looked at earlier during the work session. And this area is deemed for future land use as an urban area. I've also included on page 197 a map that depicts the existing streetlight locations in the area. And I can tell you that developers will continue to be required to install streetlights in compliance with city engineering standards as future subdivisions are proposed. While the Lone Pine subdivision on Denver Avenue, east of Texas, does not have streetlights, the developer was required to install the bases and conduit to accommodate the installation of the lights in the future. The roadway will be closed to through traffic during construction to allow residents that live along the roadway to access their properties. And staff is also recommending all-way stop controlled intersections at Texas and Denver and Texas and Cedar. So as I mentioned, the project is slated to be paid for by resort tax funds. The current estimated cost for Edgewood and Texas is $5.1 million. It's recommended that we include $2.7 million in the resort tax budget for fiscal year '23. So based on all of that, I do respectfully request council approve the final design as presented in this report and authorize staff to bid the project. Appreciate your consideration, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Craig. Appreciate the detailed staff report. We will start with questions unless someone has a motion one way or another to move this forward. Ben?
I think I can comfortably make a motion here if you'd like to start that way. I would move to accept the design presented to us, incorporating option 3, which is standard city streetlights at intersections with standard city bollard lights spaced between intersections. And if there's a second, I'd be happy to talk about it.
Is there a second to the motion? Seconded by Councilor Norton. Ben?
So, as many of you may know, I am one of the recipients of streetlights in my front yard recently on Edgewood there. And I'll just say from personal experience that they have not ruined my experience of living there. I don't know that they've greatly enhanced it either, however. And I do think that we have to consider the fact that, this part of town is very rural. But it is also a part of town that may develop further as time goes on. And, we don't do projects like this very often. And so I think that needs to be considered. In my opinion, option 3 seems to be a good middle ground here. It allows us to maintain streetlights at the key intersections going up Texas, and it also significantly reduces the total amount of lights that are shining over the road by the use of the bollards. So that is my opinion.
Ben, does your motion imply standard streetlights at the intersections of Edgewood, Waverly, Cedar, Aspen, and Denver?
Yes, but not further up from that.
Correct. Not north of Denver in
Not
Texas?
north of Denver.
Would it be on the north side of the intersection of Denver and Texas? Or just the southeast and southwest corners?
I have no preference on that, I
Okay,
suppose.
I'm just curious. Further discussion, Frank?
Ben, I like your motion. I think it's a step in the right direction. I'm conflicted by supporting it and taking a more strident position, as I've taken in the past, though I have not been able to support it, that I don't think, particularly since the neighborhood does not want these lights, this neighborhood has not had lights, that we need to further burden our infrastructure, our cost and electricity usage, to accommodate lights in this particular area. I disagree, it's one of the few places I significantly disagree with my friend Craig. I don't think we need them, particularly when the neighborhoods don't want them. I don't think it adds particularly to safety. We don't have a particular bad crime problem in this area. We don't anticipate a bad crime position in this area. Yeah, they can make an argument that it makes some places safer. This is not a place that needs to be made safer. So I'm conflicted, Ben. I like your motion. I think it's a good step in the right direction. But I really would prefer that we just take heart that we are a city of a small town that has had a history of being rural, and I think we honor that where we can. I mean, downtown, I get it. Parts of Edgewood, I kind of get it, given where it is. But I don't think we need to be running streetlights out Texas. I mean, it's like, really? I just don't see it. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Thanks.
Thanks, Frank. Steve?
Can I ask Craig a question?
Of course.
Is it possible to, for lack of a better term, plummet for future use to install streetlights and bollards and those kind of things, but not install them now? I mean, I understand that it's going to cost more later probably, but.
Yeah, in fact, that's, I guess, why I brought up the Lone Pine subdivision scenario. I think we ran into this exact roadblock when that project was making its way through council, and council's direction was to install the conduit and bases for future streetlight addition. So I think that's an opportunity here as well. There wasn't a shared use path that went in with Lone Pine. There was just a sidewalk. And it's not deemed a collector roadway to move as much traffic as Texas Avenue. But yeah, that could be done.
Thanks, Craig.
Could an alternative be to Ben's motion, plus adding the conduit for future bases for the installation of standard streetlights beyond just the intersections?
So the way I understood Ben's motion was it was standard streetlights at the intersections with bollard lights in between.
Right, so at some point in the future, could we replace the bollards with standard
Yeah,
streetlights?
our city standard bollards have the same power requirements, same bases.
Okay.
I believe the bolt detail's different, but you could reuse those bases for standard streetlights in the future.
And the spacing would be similar to streetlights?
Well, that's where a question comes up. It is recommended from the manufacturer that the bollard lights be placed about 3 times as frequently on 60-foot centers as opposed to 180-foot centers. I think we'd come up with a design that kind of marries the two so that we don't have extra bases.
Sure.
Should we install standard streetlights in the future?
Okay, thanks, Craig. Giuseppe?
Yes, and just to follow up to this conversation, I wanted to make sure I understood your motion. say we approve as moved, are the bollards gonna be which distance between each other? Because here it says recommending 60 feet, and instead, standard street lights would be 180. So you would have one every 3 bollards of a standard street light. Is your motion calling for street lights in the corner and then every 60 feet a bollard light? Because that's not clear from option 3.
Yeah, I think option 3 was intended, it was intended to have bollard lights at a recommended spacing. It didn't come up until just before our last public meeting 2 weeks ago that that recommended spacing is 3 times as frequent as a street light. So I think we'd have to finalize that design, but I don't think we'd wind up putting them on 60-foot centers. I think we'd be using them as waypoint lights, not as lights intended to, they're not going to provide the same level of safety even if we put them at 60 feet. So I think we'd probably wind up going with the standard street lighting layout at 180-foot centers, but only putting the actual street lights at the intersections.
Answer your question, Giuseppe, I'm comfortable letting Craig and the engineers work that out based on what he just said.
Yeah, again, I think the safest thing to do for the roadway would be to have the street lights on 180-foot centers, but I'm hearing that council is willing to negotiate on this one, and so I'd probably just substitute those bases in between the intersections with bollard lights.
At the standard 180-foot spacing.
Correct.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign, and that motion does carry unanimously. Thanks, folks, for sticking around. I know it's been a long evening. Appreciate your public comment tonight. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
We will move on to item 9A. You have Dana's written report enclosed with the packet. Any questions for Dana? Not seeing or hearing any. Dana, anything additional to report on?
Sure, I do have one item. I want to congratulate Bridger Kelch as our new Chief of Police tonight. Bridger did a fantastic job today. We held interviews with him. We had the school district participate. Mayor Mulfeld was there along with city staff. He also received the unanimous support of our police commission when considering his application for the position of chief of police. So we are thrilled to have him officially join our executive leadership team here at the city. He's a community asset that I think it was a no-brainer. And so we're very thrilled with that new hire. But other than that, I have nothing else to add tonight.
Thanks, Dana.
And Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the city manager's report. And
We don't typically have to.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. We just
that's an
typically.
airport thing. We do it there, so.
No, at the airport?
Yeah, but I wanted
okay.
to amend it to ask that next year a chief needs to jump in the frozen lake.
And I would move that if he does that, he loses his job. For bad judgment, I might add.
We will move on to item 9C. We'll hear from Dana on the 2021 impact fee report, which is a continuation from our last meeting. Dana.
Yep. Thank you. This evening you have in your packet the impact fee report for fiscal year 2021. This was prepared by former Finance Director Dahlman while he was still here, but we just never did get it on the agenda. So I'll briefly review it with you. It's the same report that we do annually in which our city code requires the presentation of the annual report to the City Council. As you can see, impact fee cash balances have increased over the past year, which is expected given the growth that we're seeing in our building. The cash reserves did grow by about $1.2 million from fiscal year 2020, and those vary by each type of impact fee. Impact fee revenues, as you can see, have when you look at this report, it's important to recognize the timing of when we've done adjustments to our rates. In fiscal year 2020 was the first year that we actually had our rates fully adjusted for the impact fee study that we had done in 2018. And so you'll see that some of the impact fees actually decreased in the amount of revenue collected. However, that was expected. And that really has to do with our paved trails, not our paved trails, our emergency services center, city hall, and stormwater, and the park maintenance building. Paved trails, we did actually do a slight increase when we adopted new rates back in 2018. The water and wastewater impact fees, we are seeing, wastewater kind of held steady over the past year, while the water impact fees also increased. Generally we're seeing, that we're following, the building permitting. What you'll see in fiscal year 21 is that we did go up slightly, and again, that has to do with a rate increase that was subsequently adjusted for in January of 19, and then also again in September of 19 for our water impact fees. And to just do a little history there, when we increased the water impact fees, it was due to the addition of the water treatment plant expansion project that we didn't actually have calculated within those rates that we had learned about because of the need for additional capacity. Expenditure-wise, the city, continues to focus on utilizing the impact fees collected. It's important to use the impact fees that we are collect within, a 5 to 7 year period really is standard, what you hear from other communities, as it is collected from developers for the impact that they are having on our systems. It has to be used only for capital improvements, impact fees, and they have to have a useful life of 10 years or more, according to state law. So projects that we've utilized it for in 2021, obviously our wastewater treatment plant was the most significant. We've also used it on some paved trail expansions, as well as some water projects. As we look forward to this next budget year, we'll also be again reviewing impact fees to see what projects we can utilize those funds for. It has saved us on financing costs for the wastewater treatment plant this last year, as well as our water treatment plant. So on September 1st of 2021, the Impact Fee Advisory Committee did meet and reviewed this report, and they unanimously approved the annual report for presentation to the City Council. I will give you just a brief update before seeking your approval of the report. I know that it'll be brought up, but about our impact fee audit and everything that was brought forward in the past. This past weekend, actually, we had staff working to go through and do a final, second audit of the calculated figures, and we will be we're working with GIS to get all the addresses of the current property owners from the county to issue the payments to those property owners who are due funds. And for open permits, which we were able to immediately correct, was about $63,000. For closed permits, we're looking that we're going to have to refund is about $133,000. When you look at those total amounts, that about $196,000. It's pretty well split 50-50 on water and sewer. So when you look at the amounts we collected, we still would have collected significantly more. From prior years. So it's not to say that it's, and not significantly more than prior years, I should say, our cash reserves will still grow. So those funds will be remitted back to the property owners, not the developers or the contractors, because state law does call that out very specifically, that it goes back to the property owner when the refund is due. And we have sought legal counsel and through our auditors that a refund would be due when it's estimatable and actually found. So, and it makes sense from a financing perspective in that the property owner paid for a higher cost of the build or the purchase of the home, that impact fee would be included in the cost to purchase. So we do have an FAQ on our website for people that are interested in what the audit means. what permits were affected. And as time permits, I'll eventually get everything wrapped up into a report. I got a nice stack on my desk, so anybody who wants to come help tie that up can, but we will get to that eventually. So our auditors will be on site March 1st, and so that is something that they will be also looking at during the financial audit this year. But if you have any questions on the annual report, I'm happy to answer them.
Thanks, Dana. Frank?
Turn my microphone on again. Dana, this is just, and this can be just an absolute swag. What is the average refund going to be for those that were affected? We're talking $100, $200, not thousands of dollars.
Let's see, I can see what my computer says. You know, the standard, if you had one, I think if it was one or two one shower that was miscalculated, it's about $426.
Okay.
We do, I would say, you know, you're probably looking upwards of maybe more like $700 to $850 for the average. There are
Okay.
some that are much higher, and then there are some at that $426, $427. That is what you'll see for that standard one shower.
Okay, great, thank you.
Further questions, or can I have a motion for approval?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve to approve the annual report on impact fees.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Sweeney. Further discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. And those opposed, like sign. Thank you, Dana. We'll move on to communications from the City Council. Why don't we start this evening with Giuseppe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had a bunch of things, but for the sake of the siren, I'm going to focus on only one. First of all, I want to congratulate the staff, the public, and the council for what I think was another good night of good work. I'm thrilled about the developments like Trailview. I really believe that they can change the panorama of affordable or reasonably priced housing. At the same time, I'm saddened that the Whitefish Housing Authority has only collected $18,000 on top of $75,000 that the CVB has somehow donated. And I'm kind of puzzled and conflicted by the fact that we seem to be wanting to send a message that we have done enough to attract tourism here. Even when we don't pay, we get advertised in New York City, Chicago, and Los Angeles. At the same time, we say we need to throw more money at reasonably priced houses. And yet, under our jurisdiction, we have a body called the CVB, which acts at the same time as a nonprofit, managing bed tax money and grants at the tenor of $130,000 last year, and also as a private business collecting around $800,000 last year that are going to be devolved into promoting tourism outside of Whitefish in 21-22. Now, I understand that the mandate of the CVB is to promote tourism. But I still struggle with the fact that probably we should think and find a way, or even first discuss and decide, if those $800,000 wouldn't have been better spent on top of the $75,000 that have been graciously donated to the Whitefish Housing Authority. Thank you.
You'll be seeing the CVB's proposed budget here probably in the next 2 months. Giuseppe, and our responsibility is we only have jurisdiction and oversight over the public bed tax revenues that we receive back from Helena. The private bed tax revenue, if I'm not mistaken, we don't vote on, we don't approve. So theoretically, that portion of the budget we do have authority over, or some say in how those dollars are used. So just something to keep in mind when we are presented the budget here in the next couple months.
I fully understand. That's why I said I'm conflicted.
I agree. Yep. Steve?
Do we want to postpone talking about housing to another meeting since it's already 10 o'clock? Because I have some comments about some things that I think we need to consider at some point, but I don't know.
I wouldn't
that
mind
now
adding it
is-
for a quick agenda item for the next meeting if possible, Dana, just to wrap up the work session.
Yeah, we'll throw the PowerPoint under Dave, under planning, and we can have it as an agenda item that way. Because I
Yeah.
think some people probably would have liked to see that PowerPoint as well.
Yeah, that would be great, and then it would be part of the packet, which I think someone from the public requested a copy, so that would kill two birds with one stone. Anything else, Steve?
No, well, just a small comment about that. It's related, but not not the deep stuff. I just want to say I'm hopeful and very, in the past couple of weeks, a lot of people have reached out to me to discuss, hey, what can we do? And I'm hopeful, and I understand that we have a lot of great people in this community that are willing to dig in and do some hard work over the next however long it takes to provide more housing for the workforce in this community, so that we keep the people who want to work and live here, provide a place for them to do that here. Because I do believe firmly that that's what has made this town great, is the people.
Thanks, Steve. Frank?
Just a couple of things, and I would like to publicly thank the Scouts for coming. I got to say that this was one of those meetings that was maybe a little like watching paint dry for them, but at the same time, I'm glad they were here. I hope they did get something out of it. So anyway, I think that was a great thing. I would like to say that notwithstanding our tabling this evening, the Highway 93 South zoning, I think we have to commend David and Wendy for doing effectively what we asked, which is providing us with an avenue for incorporating into the city attractive without spurning it. And unlike some of the comments that we received, if we simply said, okay, if you want to come into the city, then you're going to have to make it all residential, we would never get any opportunity for any of those places probably to come or incorporate into the city. And so I commend you on what you did. I think we did the right thing by tabling it this evening, and that there are probably a couple of things that we ought to tweak and change. But I want to, I may have been hard on you in the past, but you need to know that I think you guys did what we asked, and I appreciate that. And you were sensitive, I think, to the feelings of this community, unlike was referenced. And so I just want to make that clear. And then I also want to chime in or pile on. I think Jerry Dunker has done a great job, and we need more Jerry Dunkers in this city. I hope OP encourages others to take his attitude towards development. Thanks.
Thank you, Frank. Ben?
So I also would like to make one comment on the 93 South. I didn't make a comment during our hearing, and maybe I missed my opportunity there, but if you'll indulge me for a second. Let me try to articulate this. So I think the one thing about the 93 South proposal that changes things is the presence of residential. So there's a lot of land down there, and we're not only talking about the first 100 feet on the highway. And I think that the way that a lot of these parcels may get developed is with commercial and residential behind it. And I think, to your point, a lot of these uses can be, Andy, a lot of these uses can be done on septics, but residential is one of the things that is hard to do on a septic. And so it changes the equation, I think, for both developers and for us, because I think that for developers, residential may be, at least in the back of the lots or whatever, a good thing. And I think for us, as a community, I think that could be good too. We're up here talking about lack of land available for housing. So that's a long way of saying, I think that there are reasons why, even if we have somewhat more restrictive requirements on the commercial side than the county does, why we still may see people trying to annex is because they'd like to also build residential in the back of the lots. So that's a long way of saying, I think we should make the transitional zoning district what we think it should be to match the community, not what the county does, because I still think you'll have people that want to join our community for the housing and for other reasons too. So what does that mean to me? In my mind, I mean, honestly, the commercial sprawl going to south, whether that's good for us or not, I struggle with, but I do think the residential is good. So in my mind, it would be small-scale commercial, no strip, maybe that's single tenant, maybe that's smaller building or something like that, with opportunities to develop housing in the back of it. That's the way I would like to see this, and I still think if we did that, I still think we would have people wanting to come in, even if the commercial part is more restrictive because it allows for residential. So that's my comment.
Thanks, Ben. Rebecca?
I agreed, Ben. I have three things. One, congratulations, Bridger. Really happy for you and for us. And then following up on the alcohol and marijuana with Maria, I just wanted to have the public, since we just passed recreational marijuana law, could you just talk about how that's allowed in our parks or not?
The consumption of marijuana is still not permitted in public places. It's just legalizing possession.
Okay,
So still can't consume marijuana in public parks, and you cannot consume alcohol in public parks without a permit.
Okay. And then another thing is, I was looking at a land use map, and it just has a scanning little thing on it. Is there any way we could upgrade those to put when the hearings are for that? Because not everybody has a smartphone, and that's really the only way other than calling you guys to know what the timeline is for things.
Are you talking about the public notice signs?
Yeah,
So
the little blue ones.
we have a phone number, a web page, or the scanning thing, or they can come in. So scanning is just one, the QR code is just one way that someone can find out where information is. We want to be able to reuse those signs we use them for multiple public
Okay.
hearings. We don't want to have a new sign for every single different public hearing.
Right. It just.
And
Okay.
so they can call us, we can send them an agenda, we can send them a legal notice. We have like a table on that webpage, tells you when the hearing is, tells you when it's going to council. We also have this interactive map. You can also click on each different project and it'll tell you, link it to the application, tells you when the public hearing is, and
Okay.
given way more information than when I very, very first started. So I think we've really done a pretty good job of public notice.
All right. I was just thinking of elderly people in our community that might not even have.
They call us.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. Andy?
I have nothing other than congratulations, Bridger. I know this last couple months has been a little trying, I'm sure. But we all knew you'd come through and you're where you should be, and we've all known that for a long time, and I'm happy for you. So, and I'm happy for our community that we get a great police chief. That's even better.
Thanks, Andy. I'll have a couple topics here to discuss. Dana, did we want to finalize a council retreat date tonight? Do you guys have your calendars available? I think we are tentatively shooting for the latter part of April and or first part of May. Maybe just start with that and let me know what would be your preference. I think we've selected a location that's only about 20 minutes from Whitefish, so those that have to return in the evening for whatever reason can, but understand that it's probably going to go most of the first day and at least halfway into the second day, and a lodging will be provided, and there'll be facilities for both a large meeting room as well as cooking facilities as well.
During the week, is that?
We typically do it during the week if possible. I would be open for either. Yes, one.
Noon till noon, or 8 a.m. till 8 p.m.?
Typically noon to noon.
Yeah.
Can you do
Calendar and see if we have a holiday and. I don't have any personal days left. Go ahead and discuss and I'll see if I can find a day.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I'm functionally available anytime after like the 19th of April.
Okay.
So.
And I'm available after, from Monday the 25th. I'm out of the country until the 24th of April.
Okay, so we'll start with let's just say starting the 28th. Give you a couple days to recover.
Yeah.
Ben, are you available? Yes. Rebecca? Andy?
May is better for me.
That's fine. Would you prefer to do it during the week, Steve, or what's more accommodating for your schedule?
I won't, if it's during the week, I don't have the days off.
Would the council be willing to do a weekend? And that obviously involves staff as well, so I have to extend that. You know, we typically invite the city manager, the city attorney, and the planning director for at least a portion of the meeting, certainly the city manager. So we'd have to do a weekend, Steve? Saturday, and that's okay, but
I'll cook Saturday dinner if they agree.
you're on.
Okay.
We can
So-
start on a Friday afternoon and go most of the day Saturday.
We could do that. What time could you arrive on the 6th?
I could get there 4:30. I could get there about 4.
Would you like to start on a Friday evening and end on a Saturday, just so we have at least one weekend day?
Yeah, the only thing is 5 p.m. Friday, it's martini. I don't care what else we do.
You're on.
Okay.
So we'll tentatively go for the 6th and 7th of May, and I'll check with the facility tomorrow and make sure that those dates work, but tentatively mark those down on your calendar, and Dana and I will work on the arrangements, and I'll work on the agenda with you as well, council.
Do you have a holiday on Cinco de Mayo? Okay, just asking.
One of the calls I most frequently receive in town over the years is our neighbors that live out in the Birch Point area and East Second Street at the crossings with the railroad. And I reached out to Matt Jones when I received a few calls last week. Matt Jones is the Executive Director of Public Affairs with BNSF, and he's been a great help to the city. And I asked him regarding the delays, the increased frequency, it appears, of the delays at both Birch Point as well as Second Street. I could either read his reply to you now very briefly, because I would like the public to have the opportunity to understand what's going on with their operations as it relates, so I'll do this very quickly. I know the hour's late. Mayor Mulfeld, thanks for contacting me last week about recent reports of trains occupying the East Second Street crossing for extended periods. 2 trains required inspection at Whitefish last week that couldn't stop clear of Second Street and Birch Point. BNSF operations in Whitefish avoid this scenario whenever they can by conducting inspections of longer trains in Havre or Hauser, Idaho. Unfortunately, circumstances occasionally require inspections at Whitefish, but we will continue to prevent those events when possible. Longer westbound trains can also block Second Street during crew changes. We minimize the amount of time at the Second Street crossing by holding trains east of Whitefish, east of the crossing, until the new crew is on duty and ready before pulling up to the change point. In addition, BNSF regularly evaluates our operations to improve the flow of traffic and reduce time at crossings. Last year, we found that certain trains were arriving at Whitefish with cars needing to be switched out in the middle of the consist. I don't know what that means. Those switching operations moved across the Birch Point crossing. We made adjustments at the origin point of those trains to put the cars being set out in Whitefish on the end of the train. This has significantly reduced switch moves across Birch Point crossing. And again, thank you for your feedback, and please continue to keep me in the loop as you hear from your constituents and residents. So just wanted to let everyone know, I think they are making an effort to reduce conflicts at both crossings, and I'll email this out in case you get asked by the general public. You'll have some information to share as well. Finally, Bridger, congrats. I actually really enjoyed our interview today, and I didn't really realize the depth of your professional career, which has been very decorated. It was really neat for me to hear about that, and just your command of the subject matter today was very clear that you're obviously the right pick. There were a couple things you said that really resonated with me and speaks to your character. You indicated that you're not entitled or deserve the position, but you've certainly earned it, and I couldn't agree more. Your comments about empowering your officers and also holding them accountable as well as yourself accountable, I think speaks volume to your character, and I'm just very proud to have our new chief of police being a born and raised citizen here in Whitefish. So again, congratulations. I think you're going to do just an exceptional job and represent our city very well. So congratulations again. And on that note, we are adjourned. Thanks.